good.
All right, great. Well, thank you. Wanted to convene the B-1 Working Zoning Committee meeting on December 9th, 2019. We'll have, I think we actually should welcome Susan from the advisory board to the working group. That appointment was made, actually, I think, on town meeting on the 11th. So welcome, thank you for attending. Tonight, what I wanted to go over review is we do have the draft of the report that's been delivered to the committee as well as the planning board. And we'd like to go through that, get some of your comments. One of the things I did talk to Josh, and Josh is not here this evening with us, but we talked a little bit about the report and whether, you know, it needed to be voted on or not as a report. We really haven't landed on anything in particular related to the report. It's their report, so one potential option as we talk through this is just accept the report and leave it at that, not official vote. But we can talk about that as we go through it. Sometimes you might want to have a vote to accept it or not to accept it, or, you know, depends the flavor, what people think about it. But that's something we want to think about. As we know, the B1 zoning articles were IP'd from the November 19th town meeting, so we want to talk about the next steps, where we're at, potential involvement with MAPC going forward for the spring, or a special meeting related to the B1 zoning. So I did have a, if you remember this report, the zoning analysis as well as the design guidelines were part of a grant that we received from Mass Housing. So the funder for the grant work was through Mass Housing. I did have a conversation with Mass Housing and Josh a few weeks ago. Gave him a status of the project, where it stood and where we're at, and where hopefully maybe we go from at this point. We let him know that obviously the articles were indefinitely postponed. They weren't carried forward, and talked about some of the issues related to why they weren't brought before town meeting. One of the things they're looking at is to potentially do some additional funding for us to continue to have MAPC's involvement of it. On the phone, there was discussion that they had done some work, MAPC, with Mass Housing in Salem, and from that experience in Salem, although not like communities per se, the experience about going through recommending zoning changes, going to town meeting, citizen involvement, had some similarities that Josh is going to be working on putting together a supplemental scope of work to present to Mass Housing to see if they'll fund that to continue on working with us relative to the zoning articles. And so I don't have anything yet, but I'm anticipating having something over the next week or so that once I get it, I'll send it out to the committee, and then we can talk about meeting relative to that scope of work and next steps. The one thing I did want to talk about, though, right now is, and I think you were talking about it just casually before I came in, is scheduling. Clearly, lessons learned for myself going through this process. There was a lot of good, solid commentary that came in at the point where we were when the articles were drafted and the text of it came together, and that was kind of in a condensed crunch time. I think that really kind of, you know, presented itself through the hearings that we had and some of the public meetings, and going to the Board of Selectmen's meeting, planning board, and then the advisory board. Is then getting to kind of connect the dots a little bit better, because this was a specific project for the B1 zone, but I think at least at the advisory board it came up several times. I think around is that connection between, you know, the vision, the concept, how this all ties together, which is really kind of, this is an output of just a specific vision that we need to kind of work back on that a little bit more to make the connection for people and get some more feedback. Then there was discussion, should others participate in the process, you know, at least if not formally, informally? And that was one of the things we probably want to talk about as well, that we're not up against the deadlines when the hearings come up and then the vote comes and then we don't get some of that critical feedback going forward. There are several recommendations in this report that will go through. Some are what we have already seen, and then some are some additional recommendations. We can kind of talk about those as well. And that's kind of my overview for right now. Would you like to just specifically, topically talk about each one? Perhaps, as opposed to maybe the report, start with there. If anybody have any general comments about the report?
Is Josh going to present the report?
That's a good question. And I'll ask him about that. Present it, and to present it to whom, I guess. That would be, would you want to have?
Good question. Good question.
Did you want to have, well, just thinking about it, did you want to have perhaps a joint meeting that, you know, maybe several boards and committees would be invited to it, and we would obviously have it so it'd be televised, is certainly one approach to do that. I can ask him about doing that to see who would be interested. More at least one, there's a few things relative to the report. There's some edits that need to be in there that I've gone through. I want to talk to him about that, particularly around some of the analysis points, specifically with the build-out analysis. There are some properties that show up and that are already built and developed, so I don't really think we should include those. I think the presumption should be that they're already developed, so. And those are reflected on the current zoning as well as the potential build-out. The one that comes to mind is the condominiums up on the Hill Meeting House.
It's a big site,
On the other
too.
side.
On the right-hand side, if you look at just behind you, the chart, it's on the table. So this property here, 14-41-10-4, that actually is, I'll just scroll over. So that's right here. These condominiums.
They have it as a developable site in the report.
Yeah, it's listed as a developable site, but in fact, it's already developed, so I don't think it's really reflective of what. I mean, I suppose anything can happen, but that's a stretch to think that all those people are gonna, you know, sell their property and go away.
I have a question.
Sure.
And also some comments, but when a report like this is, you know, accepted or approved or whatever happens then, what type of readership would something like this get? Like, would this be posted on the town site, and then typically in your experience, do people read this? Will people in town go through and read the whole thing? No. So, okay. That was my expectation. I thought maybe if anyone will read this, they will read the first part, that summary, and the summary is still super confusing. The wording is not, and again, I don't know if that's the intent, but if we think the townspeople are maybe not going to be in favor of this out of the gate, and we need to do some communicating around that to help help everyone understand just what the pros and cons are of these recommendations. To me, the wording is still a little confusing, and the residential buffer requirement, the wording doesn't make sense. I don't know if it was like half edited or something. And the parking space one, I thought didn't portray at least my understanding of what the recommendation was. We've heard dialogue about that one in particular too. So it says to reduce it to one, but it's unclear, like at the builder's discretion based on what they're planning to put in that building. They don't have to only have one. While that maybe sounds obvious, I've heard folks bring that up and have concern over it. So that would be one where I would say, we know people are concerned, we should just address it out of the gate. So I think we can spend some time maybe with that summary page. Also, just thinking that if we have this report, it would be advantageous to us to have that summary page available as we prep for meetings to be able to pass out. And I don't feel comfortable or confident that the current summary would do justice to the work that has been done and the discussions that have been had.
Absolutely. And just to touch base quickly, the intent would absolutely be to have this available on the town website. And while I don't believe that somebody is going to sit next to the fire with a cup of hot cocoa and read through all 159 pages, I think it was, what they will do, in my view, would be to search this for the key points that are triggers for them, things that they see as important. So you reference parking. I could imagine people going into this document saying, the rest of this, search
Apartment.
parking,
Yeah,
find the
parking
parking note, identify that, and then build off of that to get whatever information they need to substantiate their position.
I think the people who are gonna read it are the people who read the entire town warrant, who read,
Oh, yeah.
who go
there's
to
gonna
every
be-
single thing, which is maybe 10 people
10
in
people.
town.
That's a good
And of those 10, 7 of them are gonna post it on the Norfolk community page, and then everyone's gonna
Yeah.
read the piece that they posted.
Right.
Well, so then we
That's-
want to make
that's-
sure that there's less confusion for what they post.
Exactly.
Out of the gate, that's our responsibility. That's what I see as our responsibility to, we want these to pass. We need to tee them up better. Whether it's in this report or the communications that accompany the report, but definitely the summary needs to be revised, in my opinion.
No, I think that point's well taken. To answer your question, yeah, it would definitely be out there on the website for public consumption, but, and in point of fact, actually, the whole challenge these days is, disseminating information. Obviously, there's obligation to disseminate, and they disseminate too quickly, and it's a draft, and then it gets, what versions of it, you always kind of run that risk, but I agree. I think we can, I'll talk to Josh about the executive summary being even maybe not a detailed level or more technical, make sure that it's clear, but also maybe just looking at the wording to make sure it's clear to the reader.
The one point that I called out,
The buffer.
just if you read the sentences, it doesn't flow. You have to read the sentence like 6 times to understand what it says.
I mean, it's like 2 pages isn't much of a summary either. I know there's a lot of content, but
Yeah.
it's supposed to be a teaser. So do some work on it.
Yep. Okay.
Or we could create our own summary of it. too. Need be.
Go back to it. So.
I have noticed that when writing warrants and summaries and recommendations, I think people feel like if they put a lot of extra words in there, it makes it seem more professional or more intelligent, when actually sometimes it makes it less so. So reducing the number of superfluous words that you don't actually need would probably be better.
The one I'm calling out, Rich, is on page 5. It's at the top of page 5. But residential buffer, I just stood out to me.
I will say overall, I thought it was a pretty excellent report based on our meetings and the conversations we had and community input and everything. The report came a long way from its draft version, and it's a pretty good collection of everything we talked about last year. So. With a lot of extra stuff,
Yeah, one of the,
like the sewage stuff.
I mean, this, maybe actually, maybe you have them redraft an executive summary, because this actually, for the most part, is really that 2-page informational document that was prepared for people as a summary, which might not do the trick as an executive summary too. So I'll talk to him about that for sure on the recommendation. So, but I do think the other point that I made is going through, like on the build out, I think it's important to kind of clarify those, some of the parcels that may be potential for build-out for publication. Because I think, obviously, one of the big things that came up was, how much potential build-out could occur. I think the one thing I read it, and I kind of still feel like maybe it's not clear to the reader that when we talk about potential build-out, we don't have a time frame associated, and I felt like going through the meetings with folks, at least it seemed like there was, shovels are in the ground and things are imminent. I think that might be something that could be a little bit better addressed for people, just to understand as potential build-out, but there are factors which would build back into that, whether or not some of these actual numbers will really come to fruition or not. I think that seemed like, because I think sometimes people might really take too much in the build-out, like this is gospel almost, and this will happen, as opposed to doing more of it could happen, but there are a lot of factors that come into play whether or not that will actually happen. I don't know if that struck people at all, but.
No, I agree. It was kind of like what we were discussing directly right before the meeting was. So somebody's going to sell all their property, every single property owner in town is going to sell their property to a developer, and there's going to be 690 apartments in the middle of town today or tomorrow. So yeah, that's what I think people are thinking.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm thinking. There's four parcels that are available currently right now. If all four of them went 40B, all four went for the max, there would be 675 apartment units. That's the math. You presented that math to us at the advisory board on a piece of paper, written down either by this board or by the planning board. That wasn't me guessing. I wasn't saying it was going to happen tomorrow. I understand it's going to happen over the next 10 to 15 years. But what I'm saying is I've lived here for 12 years now. I know the town looks relatively similar as it did when I moved here 12 years ago. There's a couple new neighborhoods, things like that. But in general, it looks pretty much the same. If you're talking about in another 12 years, that's what we're talking about, 10 to 15 years. In another 12 years, you could possibly, we're talking worst case scenario, because when you're going to change your zoning requirements, you must think of the worst possible scenario, because that way you can prevent it. You want to think, what is the worst thing that can happen if we allow this, and then let's make sure we have safeguards in place not to allow that if we don't want it, right? So you have to think of that. If that's the case, in 12 years, there could be 675 units in downtown Norfolk. Downtown Norfolk will not look like downtown Norfolk anymore, if that is the case. Is that going to happen? Probably not, but there are currently 4 available parcels that can have units on it. And if they go 40B, they can have as many as they want. So
that was the point of this committee, was to make those properties more potentially attractive to developing them in a different way. That was the point of what we were doing here, right? So,
Yes.
so somehow that got lost in translation to everyone.
Well, I agree. I agree with that. So, Rich, to your point, I also agree that we need to do a better job communicating the time frame. That's kind of at the end of our last planning board meeting. I kind of went into that a little bit, but I think we've got, to speak to this conversation directly, 40B is a large part of the conversation that we've been having here, and I think there's a lot of people out there that don't understand what 40B is or what its implications are, and maybe we need to do a better job explaining that in and of itself. But there's 2 projects that have been talked about in town, 40B projects. One of them being Southwood, and the other one being the Big Dig project. Both of those projects had more housing units in than the proposed zoning changes have in the center of town. So if any one of those projects went forward, they would have more housing units than the proposed zoning recommendations would allow. So, 40B is a problem. The gentleman that stood up at town meeting, said that maybe the way to address the 40B problem is through the state level. It's certainly one way to address it. I think addressing affordable housing at a state level is going to be difficult. But it's certainly one way to go about it. But, The restrictive zoning guidelines that this town has in place is inviting 40B development. And that 40B development isn't restricted to downtown. It could be in the pastures, fields, the airport, anywhere in town, as we've seen in some places. And I think one of the things that this committee worked to do was to encourage the denser development in an appropriate location, which would be downtown near the train station rather than in the fields and pastures and other places in town. So, you know, was any of that explained? No. Then that's not even really hinted at in, 40B isn't really hinted at all in the report. You know, so that's something we've got to contemplate and decide how
And
we
I think the
want
whole,
to present it.
the definition of 40B, why we have to have 40B, people, you know, the numbers that could potentially impact, I mean, it's all, that definitely needs to be an explanation, or how much we need to develop to meet our 40B requirements. I think that whole part of the discussion was lacking.
Well, unfortunately, the town's not in the market to be developers, so the town isn't building. So when we say we, we're not talking about the town.
Right.
We're talking about finding people who will sell their land in a desirable location for us to build 300, what do we need, 348 still?
It's 100.
No, 170 something.
170 something is what we're down to, we need to be.
117 something, right?
Well, it's 110 before the
Yeah.
census, which is, and they're talking about adding another 20% of the census. So let's, for the sake of this conversation, planning, it's probably 140, 150.
So we need 140 units to put a stop, to be able to say no to further 40B projects, correct?
To indefinitely say no to any projects for whatever amount of time, correct. To hit 10%, that's
There
what
were
we have to
already
the-
how many in the pipeline?
Not a de-
6, 7?
Well, the
40B projects.
Yes.
Well,
How many?
Bork's, where the Bork's development goes is 60
60 units, yeah.
units. And those all count because they're all apartments.
Correct, yep.
What I would suggest to talk, obviously, we don't have a say in it because we don't own the land as the town, and when I say we, I mean the town, not personally. A place that is better suited for a large apartment complex, which is what we need to get us to our max so that we can start saying no, so that we can actually start to develop a downtown center and the rest of the town the way we want to, is to find a spot in a more business-centric district, like 115 or 1A. There's a lot of available land on 115. There's a 4-acre parcel right now, right on 115 for sale, on the right-hand side. I know we don't, as the town, do that. We don't buy and develop. But encouraging that through the zoning process would make more sense. Then you can start to say, we've hit our goal. Now, let's make the zoning changes for downtown Norfolk look exactly what we want it to look like. Because right now, even if you make these changes, some of these, like what we talked about, the Stop and Shop parcel, you're basically forcing Stop and Shop out. That's what you're doing. You are doing this to get for Stop and Shop to give up the lease. But what happens when Stop and Shop gives, because we want to develop the downtown area, I understand that. But what happens when you force them to give it up? You don't know what's going in there. The person who gets it could do exactly what you say and give us business, which gives us a tax base, and some residential, a mixed-use property, and build it to the code that you're saying. Or they could say, screw you, and build a 40B project with 0 businesses in there, and as many apartment units as they can fit onto that square footage. So until you reach your 40B, you're never gonna get the downtown the way you want, and until you get a cohesive plan for the way the downtown's gonna look, you're not gonna get the residents in this town on board. That's my personal opinion.
Hold on, there's a lot of things there. Let me just very quickly, Rich, you were gonna correct something that we said about hitting 10% does not indefinitely give us the ability to not accept a 40B project?
Yeah, not indefinitely. I mean, it depends on how much development occurs. So every 10 years, they'll do a new
Okay,
census.
right.
Right,
so-
but it's a little easier to keep up with, okay, the census went up, we need to build 17 this year, or for the next,
Right,
over the next 10 years, we need to allow 17, versus we needed, when this started, I think we needed to allow 300.
So,
We were
so
so
just
far
for a
behind.
round number, we're probably in the 200 unit range to get to 10%
With the new census.
with the new census.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which, when you get a 40B project, unless they're apartments, obviously, all those numbers aren't all counting.
Right.
So that, a 40B hits in a bunch of different parts of town, unless you have that apartment component.
Only the percent of 25% of them are counting, right?
Yeah.
But I think there's a couple of points too to that conversation that, one, I don't think that was the goal of the committee to write Stop and Shop out of town. I think the goal was to create an active downtown environment, which a empty site that's land banked doesn't accomplish. So, that's one thing. Maybe we can meet with the landowners to figure out what the right development is. I think the second thing is I don't think it was the goal of the committee to create apartment buildings in the center of town. I think the goal of the committee was to create an active downtown center. And another item that I think we need to do a better job of is defining exactly what an active downtown center is. Again, the gentleman at the town meeting made a case that downtown center is active. All of the research we did over the last year indicates that a majority of the residents don't think that downtown is active enough. So how do you get an active downtown center? You get residences and mixed use involved. If you don't bring residences, the businesses aren't going to be sustainable. So part of this whole conversation is that mixed use development is required to create sustainable economic development in the center of town. With that comes an increase in density. So, those concepts are going to be difficult to explain and get the town to buy into, but that's sort of the basis of why we're here and what we're doing. So we got to figure out a way to do it.
If I may, it may not have been the B-1 committee's point for Stop and Shop out, but that's actually word for word what they said at the planning board. This is to get Stop and Shop to give up the lease so that we can develop that.
The landowners are getting like $500,000 a year from Stop and Shop so that no one else builds on that property. So they've managed to lock the landowners into a really great lease, and so nothing's going to happen there. The lease runs out in what, 7 years? So they're not going to give up $500,000 a year. Right, they're not going to give that up. They're going
Stop
to
and
keep it
Shop
for
is
the
going-
next 7 years.
Stop and Shop will give that land up and will not renew that lease if you put in a bylaw that says no grocery store over 15,000 square feet can go
It's
in.
been sitting empty since we moved into town 23 years ago.
I know, because
They're not
Stop
gonna
and Shop
put in
doesn't
s-
want, Stop and
They're
Shop
not
doesn't
gonna
want
put
to
in
put
a
a grocery
Stop and
store
Shop.
in there. They just don't want anyone else to put a grocery store in that will compete with their businesses where they have in
Down
4
the
different
s-
towns.
That's right.
So it doesn't matter if we change the zoning guidelines or not, it's
Exactly.
going to sit empty for the
That's right.
future.
It's
So-
gonna sit empty until they give up the lease, and if once they know that you've passed a law that says no grocery store can go in, they'll give up the lease.
So
And
that
then-
we wait so that the landowner might acquiesce to doing something far more different and far more interesting and far more beneficial to the town than let it sit there empty.
Is everybody agreeing right now?
Yes.
It
I
sounds
think
like everybody's
so.
agreeing right now, right? You're saying that it would be a benefit to the town if we passed a bylaw to restrict any grocery. No,
That's
you're
what-
saying
yes,
that's not what you
no.
want to do.
I am
Okay,
not saying
I was
that.
misreading that.
What I'm saying is that to do that, it seems to people, this was one of our problems, not just mine. I want to make sure that I understand that sometimes these are my opinions, but sometimes they are collectively the board's opinion. I'm not just speaking for myself. And I may or may not even agree with what the consensus of the board was. I just want to make sure that we all understand I'm
Understood.
not only speaking for myself.
Yep.
We felt it was very shady. I know that probably wasn't your intention. I know most of you. I know that's not what you're trying to do. But by putting in a law, a zoning requirement that says this is what we talked about, anything we want can go in here. Anything you want. Nursing home, 4 Kicks, anything that's not already limited in zoning, like pot shops or those kinds of things obviously can't. Restaurants, craft stores, a Hobby Lobby can go in there. It's not going to, I understand that, we don't have the traffic pattern for it. But what you're saying is anything at all can go in there with no restriction on square footage, except a grocery store. Who does that benefit? Benefit Stop and Shop. That's the only person that benefits. It forces them to give up the lease. It allows them to give up the lease without worrying that the competition's going to come in, and then it allows it to be developed. If they have a lease on it, if they wanted to, and they wanted to keep that lease, if they thought competition would go in, they wouldn't. I don't have a problem with you changing the zoning. What I have a problem with is you specifically targeting Stop and Shop to do something. If you want to make it that way, then make it that way, but don't call out specifically grocery stores.
There was nothing that was specifically calling out Stop and Shop. Nothing at all. And again, if Stop and Shop gives up that lease, then maybe the landowner, instead of getting his $500,000 a year for doing nothing with that piece of property, would develop it to something that would benefit the town.
So if you're not specifically talking about Stop and Shop, why do you say that anything of any size can go in except for a grocery store? Because I discussed
we
it with you,
edited that section
85,000
several
square
times.
feet is what that lot can hold,
The
correct?
conversation is that the town doesn't need a 40,000 square foot grocery store, but would be perfectly happy with a,
Yes,
whatever the right, 15,000 square foot grocery store like a Brothers. So that was the gist of the conversation.
But nothing of that size. I know we went through so many edits, and I don't know what's currently the final language, but nothing of that size I thought could go in.
No,
That was taken out.
it's
There were-
5 acres, so we figured it out,
Yeah.
sitting with Rich,
That's-
and we
okay.
said that one spot is, the one lot is 5 acre, is a 5 acre lot. And we asked what type of building, what size building would be the max that could go in. He said roughly 85,000 square feet would fit on a 5 acre lot with parking. Depending on what type of building it is, would matter what type of parking it needed. I said, what, so that the people who are watching this at home can understand, what is 85,000 square feet that we know of? 4 Kicks. 4 Kicks. So you're okay if a nursing home the size of 4 Kicks goes in, but not a grocery store. There's no rationale for that. A grocery store increases our tax base exponentially, whereas a nursing home is a drain on all of our resources, both fire, police. It's the only thing it's not a drain on is schools. It makes no sense to say that. So all I'm saying is if you need to have it one way or the other. Either there's no cap on anything that goes in there, because that's what it says right now. There's no cap except on a grocery store. So either say there's no cap on anything, or there's a cap on everything. Bring it all down to 45, 50,000 and say nothing over 50,000 can go in there. What you're doing now is unfair. That's what we're saying.
So
It
the-
seems shady.
so
Whether you meant it to be that way or not, that's what it seems.
So the intent of capping out, as we talked a little bit, of the grocery store was to remove the banking component of Stop and Shop to guard against a larger grocery store. They originally had, permitted a super Stop and Shop on the property. I think since I've been here the last 2 years, we had met with the broker for Stop and Shop, and they would like to get out of that lease. But the net present value of that lease to get out of it is too expensive. They can't afford to get out of it, so they're just paying it. So it seems as if some of their original intent with that site and banking, there's things that have happened with that company going along. I'm not sure that's the case anymore, but they just can't afford to get out of it because nobody will buy them out.
So then why change it to say everyone except a grocery store if Stop and Shop wants out anyway? Leave it as to anyone who wants to can go in there,
So
because that's
to
what you're
s- so
saying.
to
You're
say
saying
to them-
anyone except a grocery
So
store.
the same, if a non-competitor comes in with a smaller grocery store, perhaps you might want to get out of the lease and work the lease with the property owner, which is Eastern Development. It was to try to work with Stop and Shop, who's the lease in the land, with the property owner, who's Eastern Development, to maybe come up with a compromise to get out of it, so one moves, the other moves. Right now, the property owner has no incentive to, they're getting $500,000.
Right. My point
Stop
was,
and
We're,
Shop
we're,
has no
we're coming at this conversation the wrong way. It sounds like the committee's making a statement that we don't want to change anything that we agreed to previously. I don't know that that's true. I'll speak for myself on that one. I'm perfectly willing to talk about changes to what was proposed, including a cap on properties. We can talk about why we didn't have one if we want to. I don't know that we need to, but in my personal opinion, adding a cap is a moot point because it's a conversation we can have. I do think it's probably beneficial to get back to going through some of the report and maybe outline if we want to talk about the specific items. Most importantly, because we haven't done any talking about the map on the screen, and I think if you interpret some things on the map, a lot of the thinking behind what went into the proposal becomes pretty evident, which is something we haven't done with the public at all, right? So, like, for instance, there's really only 2 lots in town that support multi-building developments, right? But yet, we spent hours talking about multi-building development, limiting and managing multi-building developments, essentially for 2 lots. So I don't know what, what we want to do, what the purpose of tonight is to get through, if we want to go through the report one by one and talk about what people had to say about it, or, or what what we should think about to come back the next meeting to talk about, but, we could sit here and talk in circles all night without having some direction, so.
I think that where we are right now is we have a really clear idea as to what the hot button issues were with the community, right? We know what people were kind of focused on, the things that were important to them, the things that we heard in a reoccurring fashion in our community sessions and at town meeting and in individual board reviews. Why don't we make a list of those things that were identified as the problem areas, and then we can use them to work back into the report to identify where they were referenced and where we might be able to improve the way that we worded those specific items. I think that helps us get to the core of the issues that this whole thing faced as we went through this process. And please, anybody feel free to disagree if you...
It's a great idea.
Okay. Rich, do we have a list of the items that we identified as being the ones with opportunity?
We could use the executive summary, right?
Yeah, we could use executive summary, or we could just go through these pages right here if you want.
Those pages are impossible to understand. Let's use the executive summary.
All right, we can go to executive summary then. So clearly, we touched on it already. The cap, I think, was.
Well, let's start with the district boundary, because it's the first one. I think it's, there are people out there that seem to think that we were implying we were changing the district boundary or even creating the district boundary. I don't think it's known by the majority that the district boundary exists today, and we're not recommending any changes to it.
I do know part of the district boundary includes 2 acres on Boardman, on the part of Boardman that butts up to Maine. I think they were saying that it's technically a gas station or a convenience store or any of those types of things could go in there. It's a residential street. Those 2 acres probably shouldn't be part of the B1 district.
Yeah, but then we get into talking about changing the boundaries again, which is a whole different conversation.
I'm simply telling, you asked me to tell you what the
Well,
arguments were.
that property's
was just one
also-
of them.
yeah.
I don't know that there's anything you can do about it. I don't know why it was ever put into the B1. I don't know why it's
Well,
still in
and-
there. I don't know why it's not. I'm sure there was a logical reason. You asked me, that was it.
I think one of the benefits of, again, going over the map is that property's owned by the town, so the town has control over it, so.
So the property questions were 14 and 20 Boardman Street,
Right.
so not town-owned property, but next to it. So this is a town-owned property here.
I think we're switching, we're
What's that?
mixing subjects, I think. So are those the lots you were talking about?
The 2 lots in question were 14 and 20 Boardman Street. That came up.
Right on Boardman, and, technically, they were saying they're zoned, because they're part of the B1, they'd be zoned as commercial. And that just wouldn't make sense on a residential street like Boardman to have commercial businesses there.
So is that
Again-
the property owner purview to go to the zoning board and ask for a variance or to get that removed? I mean, who's
Town meeting.
responsible for
You
that?
have to make a
Town meeting vote.
Okay.
I think that was
That,
definitely.
I don't personally have a problem with that one. You just asked me.
No,
That
no,
was
I
one of
agree,
the
I
things
agree,
that came up.
yes. So that was an
He's trying to-
issue.
Yeah, sorry, I missed.
So you didn't
I was
get
talking
caught
about
off guard.
I was talking about a different property.
Oh, all right.
But just to be clear, those properties are zoned commercial because they're in the B1 district.
Right,
Correct.
but they're on Boardman Street next to residential houses, and I think those people who live in those residential houses are the ones who are saying, these shouldn't have been part. We don't know how they ever got into the B1, they shouldn't be part of the B1, they're on the corner, they're in between
yeah.
Maine and
They're a lot- yeah,
15,
they're-
they're on Boardman in that
And I,
spot, so.
and I think we clearly identified to them what the process would be, right? To do a citizen's position for a zoning change to town meeting. That was identified during the review.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think as I'm just kind of brainstorming as we're talking, I think we have the report that we have, but I think after this, we can put a list of identifiable issues that came up,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily in the report to include, as kind of an appendix to this. Because that was an issue that came up through the hearing process, not identified in the report, but it's not recommended to change the boundaries. So that zoning district boundary occurred many years ago. But through this process, people had raised the issue.
Yep.
I'm only raising it to you, not because it's not anything that, I was simply letting you know that was a concern. If you go to town meeting and you've bundled these, like is what you wanted to do the first time, and that's in there, and those residents somehow are able to IP it because they're going to appeal and get it, the zoning changed, or at least have a hearing on it, you just killed all 7 of your articles. That's all I'm telling you. I'm just trying to be here to help you navigate through that piece. I don't personally have a stake in that zoning.
Gotta use a microphone.
I'm Gary Searle at 245 Warren Drive. Yeah, the best conversation I heard around Boardman was what could be built there now versus what could be built there after the change. People were concerned about all these changes when really all it was adding was another 6 feet to the height of a building. The bank building that's right next to us here could be built over on Boardman from the discussion that I'm remembering. There wasn't a lot of change before and after is the only point I guess I would make. I saw the people there a little bit irate. They didn't believe that you could build commercial next to their property. But that isn't a change that was being proposed right now. There's almost just as much impact that's existed and could have occurred next to their property as it would have after these changes went into effect.
And the one issue that came with those 2 properties, I think earlier on in the process, there was a recommendation to reduce the minimum lot size to make the lots conforming within the district. Had that gone through the whole process and been recommended, those 2 properties, they then would be compliant relative to lot size. But right now, they're undersized. They don't meet the minimum lot size. They're 15,000 square feet. It's something to just identify, but it have to be combined to get to the minimum lot size.
We're getting sidetracked again, though. But the goal was to identify all of the comments, not to solve all the problems, right?
So we've identified that 14 and 20 Boardman Street are a
Just be
potential issue moving
prepared.
forward,
That's
right?
it.
Yep.
All right. Which,
Someone note taking?
I'm taking incredibly messy and probably illiterate notes.
I'm taking some too, but mine are probably not in better shape than yours.
we had the benefit of video to,
There you go.
besides taking notes. So building scales next, right? That one,
Scales next.
I think we already talked about that a little bit.
So
And if you
there was strong interest in setting a cap.
And in the MAPC report, that is a recommendation after the input that happened from up until all the way through town meeting.
For that one specifically, as far as the advisory board as a whole, not necessarily an individual person, because I do think there's still some individual people who had a different opinion, but the advisory board as a whole said one way or the other. Either put a cap on everybody or put a cap on no one. That was what their consensus was. And
Because the
I
only
think
thing there was a cap on was,
the only thing was a grocery store and variety stores, so
Yeah, right.
nothing else.
And
And,
municipal
and if
buildings,
you're
too.
worried about an 80,000 square foot grocery store, then make the cap 50,000, and then you don't have to worry about it. Because in all honesty, do you really want anything bigger, in a business bigger than 50,000 anyway in that area? So make it a reasonable cap that gets you to the place that you want to be without excluding a specific business.
So Josh, working through the scaling and the footprint size, in the report, it's recommended, I believe, is 20,000 square feet across the board. Cap. So we can
Which we should talk about, yeah.
But that
The
is-
library is 26,000 square feet.
what's that?
The library is 28,000 square feet, so.
With the exception of municipal buildings, we can kind of talk about that, but it's 20,000 for non-municipal, but.
I think as far as, like I said, as a whole, it was just make it fair and make it the same.
Yep.
To make sure there's no ambiguity and as to why you're doing something.
So building density is the next one. I know it was 4.3 with the advisory board, but,
This was the number of units.
yeah, number of units per acre. I mean, the one, so,
I don't think there were too
Susan,
many
maybe-
comments on this one, were there?
I don't know what the negative comments of,
This one's used to say no more than 16
yeah.
you got it, yep.
bedrooms per lot, and they wanted to change it to 16 units, which if you put a 3-bedroom unit in, would put your bedrooms per lot size at a lot more, is what the problem was. It was increases. There was also some, this wasn't me, this was someone else on the board, there was also some concern that by saying you will not exceed more than 2 bedrooms, that was going to conflict with the Fair Housing Act. So there was gonna be a problem getting, even if you pass it, it would be a problem implementing it, you might get sued, so you would want to fix that.
So that was one of the.
But again, I'm not familiar
Yeah.
with that. I know that's a
No, we
concern
were-
that was
we were
raised, but I
trying
didn't
to do-
actually do the research into that.
I think the legality thing was getting out of restricting it by bedrooms and start restricting it by units.
Yep.
Yeah, familiar status is a protected class in the Fair Housing Act, so the idea of removing that was to, now, just because it's on the books now, that it's, guarding against that in the future, that was the one component to it. I think, but this density does increase, so it's obviously, it's much greater than what's presently on it.
Well, we can have a conversation about the word much means, but, yeah.
I think the other concern, that was one concern of the advisory board. The second concern, I believe, this is worded differently than it was
This is
in
the-
the warrant.
this is
I know,
the
because this is
existing
your
language.
summary, it's not
I think this is
worded.
the existing language, too.
No, I'm saying it's not worded the way it was presented in the warrant, so
Yeah.
I'm remembering the warrant. If this is the one I'm thinking of, is this the one that it was 16, but with special permit, you could go up to 23? And so then we did the math, and we said if you went up to 23 on
Well, did it
each and every
specify a
one of
number?
them,
It allowed the planning board to entertain a higher density of 16 per acre.
up to 23,
No, there was no
Correct.
23 in it.
32, there was something, it went up, and with the way we did the math, we figured out that one 5-acre lot could have 117, there was 23 times 5, I'm pretty sure,
Oh, it's because it was 16 per acre,
right?
16 units per acre.
Right.
But was that the one that with the special permit, you can go up?
It
can
wasn't
go up.
special
It didn't
permit, it was-
specify-
it was,
yeah.
yeah.
You
It was
can
said
go
it's-
up, it
The
just
formula
is-
was 16 units per acre.
Right. It didn't specify a number above 16 per acre. The 23, I think, kind of got mashed in with across the street.
Okay.
Across the street is 23 units per acre, if I remember correctly, if I did the math.
The 40B development.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not, but the bylaw change wasn't 20, it was silent on the number. How much per acre, let me see, so.
I think what they were trying to get to was, are you going to always allow the max with the special permits? And if so, why not just go ahead and say that's how many you're gonna allow?
I've never heard anything about special permits.
Yeah,
I'm
I
sorry.
don't-
I
I
don't,
don't
Rick, I don't,
remember this
I've
language, but
never
we can
heard
look
of
at
that
it.
at all.
You could only require approval if you wanted more than 60.
Yeah,
But that would be anything, though.
There was no one.
no, there was no,
I mean, today, someone can come in and ask for 16 units per acre and by special permit.
no, not for non-assisted living, no.
Well, they can ask for it.
Again, this is
yeah,
not
yeah,
what
no,
I
we can-
had at
yeah.
the meeting,
Yeah.
but what Rich
Yeah.
presented to us it had some language that said with a special permit it could go, it was 16 by zoning, and with a special permit it could go up. So what we were
Correct,
saying
yep.
is, go ahead and put in what the max is you'll allow even by special permit, so that people can garner what the worst-case scenario would be, is what they were trying to say. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So if it's gonna be zoned for 16, but with a special permit, the planning board would allow up to X, then go ahead and put that in there, so people can assume it's going to be X, and that would be their basis, their worst-case scenario for whether or not they would approve it.
A couple things that was bundled within this, just so we can just hit a few points on this one. One was, right now the present bylaw says you can't build, no more than 2-bedroom units, so it's very clear. The conversion was making it units per acre, so it didn't specify bedrooms. It was leaving up to the market, basically the combination of bedrooms. And so that was, concern was, well, they might do 1, 2s, maybe 3s more. So there was, I think, an interest in trying to cap out more than 2 bedrooms, to kind of keep it familiar. So we bumped up against, not regulating by bedroom type. So the question is there potential interest to see that there's some ability to shape the unit counts? Maybe it's all 1 bedrooms, maybe they're 1s and 2s, or, for example, the one across, not to pick, focus on that one, but to Pedometer, there's
60 units and 8 of them are 3 bedrooms.
6 of them, yeah, yep, and they're
8. That's what he said in the last meeting.
10%.
I asked him, he said 8.
8?
In the meeting where he presented the drawing, I came
Oh,
to the zoning meeting.
we don't know what it is because we haven't seen drawings in a while.
Yeah.
But-
Well, I went to the zoning meeting, and I asked him, and he said 8.
8.
8 are 3 bedrooms, the rest are 1 and 2s.
But the reason we're worried about 3 bedrooms is because of kids in the school and.
We had to have a bus
and-
stop,
and
things
the-
like that.
And the numbers we have say that development will put 4 to 6 kids into schools. So I don't know that that's a number
if-
we need to be concerned about.
No, but I think it's more of an education piece to put out more information relative to potential. First to mind is school impacts related to housing, related to multifamily. And we do have there is a report, and just as a side note, we need to kind of have almost like a clearinghouse of information that we come through that people can read as they want, but there is information about school-aged children related to multifamily housing, and they did a study. So that study we're gonna put up there so people can read through it. That way they can look at it and make their own assessments of it. But where I was going was, maybe there is a way to have some discretion for the developer, but also some safety valve for the town. I think the market was probably want to do 1 and 2s. Why would you want to do 3s if you could put another 1 bedroom to get more 1 bedrooms? I mean, the economic advantage of 1 and 2 bedrooms versus 3 bedrooms. 40B, you have to do 3-bedroom units. It's a requirement. You have to have 10%. Under our zoning bylaw, somebody doesn't have to do 3-bedroom units. Somebody might want to, but they don't have to. So maybe I could investigate some kind of in-between for people to get a comfort level. The data suggests there's probably not gonna be school kids, because there's a lot of reasons why there weren't necessarily school kids, but that's still a fear people have. And, fear can sway people significantly in these issues, so I'm gonna,
Well, a $20 million build-out is what scares people.
The
What they're
things you're bringing up,
proposing right
Rich, though, are the school impacts, traffic, and infrastructure are 3 things related to density that have been
Right.
asked about.
yeah. All right, wanna go to the next one?
What did we identify as the potential concern related to the density?
The number of units per acre,
The putting a cap on the number of
putting a
units per
cap on,
acre? Okay.
not just saying it's 16 and then knowing that you can ask for a special permit and go to the planning board and that they may or may not give it to you, but actually putting in what is the standard as far as what's zoned, and then what is the maximum even with a special permit.
Yeah, but again, there is no maximum with a special permit. Someone can come in and say, I want to put 300 units on it and try and get it approved.
You can't put in a special permit maximum? I think that's what they're saying. They're saying put
Well, you-
it in,
I don't know if I suppose we could.
just so
That's why-
people can understand what the worst-case scenario
That's
would
why
be.
it's a special permit, because they come in and
Right.
they ask for
Well, we would
permission,
never
and
get
then you
approved.
deny them.
You say deny it, right, that's the.
Yeah, one of the key things I think we were trying to do here was to include an aspect of flexibility for developers, because one of the things that we wanted to avoid was a situation where we were never hearing about potential projects for town center because all of our zoning was so restrictive. There was no flexibility for anybody to do anything. So if somebody had something that might have been workable, where we could have negotiated and got to a better term, we were never even hearing about them because of how restricted we were. So I think a lot of the ways that these were worded and structured was to include that aspect of flexibility, along with the protections, the special permits, so that a board that typically handles these kinds of things could be the ones to determine if it's feasible or not feasible.
How often does the planning board say no to special permits?
Pretty often.
Or you negotiate.
I was gonna say, because the 2 projects that I know of currently, they approved the special permits for the height. I mean, the bank one they just did, the height right now is 40 feet, 42 feet. You're trying to go up to 46. That one's 58 with the cupola on top.
I'm not sure. I think
The cupola doesn't count towards a building height, though.
No. But we asked you in the meeting, and you said it was well over 50, and you're trying to go up to 46, so that one already went up with
The cupola doesn't count for the height.
I understand, even without it. I believe it was 56, the cupola was like 6 feet, right? So you're still talking at 50 feet. So what I was saying is it still went over, and you're already going up from 40 to 46? I'm sorry, it's been a couple of months and not all the numbers are
No, no,
fresh in my
understood,
head. I'm trying to remember them. I can't remember exactly what you said. You said currently the zoning is for a specific height, 40,
40 feet.
42,
40
right?
feet,
40
yep.
feet, trying to go up to 46, unless you have a special permit. The special permit was already approved for that one, they went up to 50-something, 60? So I'm just saying, people want to know what
Somebody
I
should
get
know
what
what
you're
tone
saying
they
is you
get.
can't put a cap in.
But I don't, I mean, we gotta check the language here. I don't think we wrote in unless by special permit in the language. But if we did, we should certainly talk about it, you're right.
Allow up to 46 feet to the peak of the roof by special permit from the planning board.
So that's
It
presently in the
says it.
bylaw. That's presently in the bylaw.
That's the
Right.
current bylaw.
That's the current bylaw. So the thought being, the prevailing thought was, if you want to encourage somebody to do 46 feet, if that's the prevailing thought, then just make it by right, as opposed to have to put somebody through a special permit process. If that's what you're trying to attract, then that was the rationale. So that change was going to make it
Right.
for,
I think I must not be explaining myself right. What I'm saying is exactly what it says right here. Currently allow up to 46 feet with a special permit. What we're saying is if you're proposing to change it to 46 feet, awesome, great, put 46 feet in. But then also say up to 58 feet with a special permit.
Or we didn't even
You
say
just-
that, though, that's what I'm saying. We didn't say special permit in the revised language. We just said 46 feet.
It's-
This is the existing language.
I understand. If that's existing language, that means it can be done, and that's what we're saying.
But we're talking about changing it.
Okay, again,
What was the exact outline that we said we were changing it to?
Well, are we're going from density to building height now?
Well, no, I was talking more about, yeah, I guess we are in building height now.
I think they're one and the same, though, because the previous argument was you couldn't specify a maximum for special permit, except the current language says by special permit, which means you can specify it by special permit. That was what we were saying.
Right,
Just
and we're
put-
trying to
just-
change that.
Okay, so yeah, so jumping from one to the other in between, we're identifying that we have to put a definitive cap instead of leaving it open to interpretation with a special permit. And then as we go into the next item, that stays consistent. We want to make sure that these kind of things are definitively outlined, whether it be by special permit or not, that we have caps on this stuff. That's what the issue is right now.
Yes.
Got it. I got there eventually. Took a little while.
All right, so I think building height was one of the ones that got approved, so it's currently 3, we were talking around 3.5. I don't know that there was too much conversation about this. We did have extensive conversation about it at the planning board.
well, it was, I mean, it wasn't.
It wasn't a unanimous vote.
No.
And you gotta remember that advisory board is just like any other system, they get up and speak, so when there's not a consensus with the advisory board, odds are the people who they're gonna speak.
All right, so what were the comments?
Just what I said. Again, I'm gonna try to do it really well, because I think I might not have been. Considering density and height at the same time, what we were saying is, again, this language is different than what we were presented with at the advisory board, and I wish I had it in front of me so that I could better explain myself. We are saying is, if you are changing it to allow it to be 16, for example, we're not asking for these exact numbers, for example, 16 units per acre, and you know you can allow a special permit, we'd like for you to say, with special permit, up to 20. So that the residents who are voting on this will know what the maximum that anyone could get, even with a special permit. Same for height. If it's going to change to be 46 all the time, because right now you have it 46 for a special permit, that's great. Leave it at 46 and then say, but we will not allow more than 53, But between 46 and 53, you have to come to get a special permit. Between 16 and 22, you have to come to get a special permit. That's all we're saying. Because right now, one of them says with a special permit and one of them doesn't. We were saying make them the same and give us what that number would be as a maximum, so that people would understand what their worst-case scenario is.
So in both cases, whether it be density or height, to include a maximum by right and a maximum by special permit.
Yes.
Got it.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of, so this bounce back and forth between three stories and 3.5 stories, and then landed on 3.5 stories. I think there was not, obviously there was consensus at the planning board on that.
I think
I-
that it
and
will
it
help you
was-
eliminate at town meeting a lot of back and forth and questions. Just like, I think we weren't understanding what the other one was trying to say, you're gonna get that at town meeting. If you can put in and tell people up front, here's their worst-case scenario, calm down, people, then you're gonna get a lot less back and forth and a lot less misunderstanding.
I guess my point would be if it's a max allowed by special permit, who's gonna just do the max by right? You're just gonna go right for the max by special permit and come, and if you say that's great, then they're gonna do that many, and if you don't, then
Well, you know, we need, it would be helpful to have Josh talk to maxes and allowed by special permit, because he'll get into flexibility, as Kevin mentioned, and things like that, and explain why putting caps on things is a bad idea. And there's processes in place, like planning board reviews, to stop abuse. So I think we certainly talk about this one.
Right, so I think, to Darren's point, we're kind of collecting the points of concern that people had, and then we're gonna speak to Josh and so forth to kind of revisit those to have an answer to response. So tonight's more of a gathering on those,
Identification. Got it.
identification of those points.
On the residential buffer.
Yeah,
We didn't end up changing the residential buffer. We had talked about making it 30 instead of 50, and we ended up staying at 50, so.
the only,
But
the only change
the
was,
wording on that one needs to be adjusted.
yeah, the only change was the change was to go from ZBA to planning board. No reduction in feet, so we can,
I think it's grammatical. That's the reason why it's not understood. There's some grammatical
Well,
errors in that
The hard part is
paragraph.
we're commenting on the existing. We're using the existing list, not the proposed language. It doesn't help this conversation.
But we're saying we didn't change that one.
This is,
We changed the ZBA to the planning board.
Which I think passed unanimously, correct?
so this executive summary is a mishmash, per
Yeah.
se, general terms. It's what's in the bylaw, then recommendations
Right, this one is,
merged together, and that's why it's a little bit confusing.
it's a lot confusing.
it's a lot confusing. It's a little confusing to folks who've been
A lot
reading
confusing.
it for several months. It's a lot confusing to the
Right.
general public.
Super
But
confusing.
just straight up, like, the grammar, as was mentioned, right? Be adjusted to be the, under the authority of the planning board. It's very difficult to read the sentence.
Yeah, right.
We need to adjust
no problem.
regardless.
All right, enough, definitely get that.
I don't remember, the advisory board didn't object to changing it from the ZBA to the.
We did not. I
planning
believe,
board.
I just asked Rich, I believe that one passed unanimously.
Yeah.
So I think,
We're not gonna declare victory on something? Can we declare victory on something?
yeah.
Done.
No, because we gotta go back to talking about 30 feet instead of 50 feet.
Again,
The lot requirements we talked about,
yeah, the more that things can be streamlined and less wordy, the less back and forth I think you'll end up getting.
so there was, we'll go to parking next. I think that's.
Because there was no conversation on the lot requirements, right? Other than the square footage.
Well, because so the end result was it makes sense to match up the setbacks with the zoning,
Oh.
6 to 19 feet. And then there was not a recommendation in the end to reduce the lot size, so there was no change there.
Yep.
So that,
All right, parking it is.
so parking
Parking was a big one.
was
Parking was a problem.
enormous.
Yeah, that was a problem.
what was the problem?
So I think parking is one of those challenge. It's before its time, I guess I'd say. I think there's merit potentially to this parking, but I think we need to put it aside for the moment, and let's have some developments that occur, just so we have to fix almost kind of visually. I mean, it went all over the place. Quite honestly, it was. I think the concept, right, of sharing parking, that, commercials.
The gist of it was that when you're talking about a straight apartment complex, like the one that's going in where the old Borks used to be, there's no mixed use. Those people own those parking spaces by right with the building that they're getting, plus there's extra for guests, right? When you're talking about a mixed-use building, this is where we're talking. We were not discussing it at all for straight residential or straight apartment. That was not where the problem was. It was in mixed-use buildings. For example, the 5-acre lot. You have 4 businesses on the bottom that are daytime businesses. The consensus was, hey, let's only put 1 parking space per apartment unit, because they're all gonna be 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. They're gonna be single people. They're gonna take the train. They're only gonna have 1 car, or none. Except if they take the train, because this was where the common sense to me was left out of it, if they take the train, their car stays in their parking spot.
But they need to have a certain number of parking spots allocated specifically for just the businesses, outside of what the requirement would outline for the residences, if I have that correct, Rich, right?
Right, but the problem was is that there didn't seem like there would be enough parking, and it would come to people having to park across the street, crossing the road, creating a bigger traffic pattern.
Yeah,
People coming through the rotary, walking through the rotary is always a problem. People are.
And so we got to explain why,
So you
and
got
then
businesses that
the-
people can't park at.
The other thing that was mentioned
They
was
wanna use them.
the future parking too, right? That we were saying get rid of the need for holding land for
Right,
the future, right? So we'll add that to the list.
Yeah, I think the whole notion of sharing the parking was definitely.
The other issue with the parking is everything else we talked about was isolated to only the B1 district.
Right.
But the parking is actually the
Town.
entire town,
So it
right?
needs to be specified to the B1. Because I think when I went to the Board of Appeals, I think where one of the members was going is the 194 Main has a higher ratio than the bylaw. I think he's at 2 somewhere per unit.
Yeah, especially once he switched from age restricted to non-age restricted, because his unit count dropped, he was even further above.
It was
than that.
way above the minimum parking, and I think not speaking for the ZBA, but I think they felt comfortable with that number. But I think there was some hesitation, at least a few of them, that if now the benchmark is 1, then if somebody comes in and we see necessity for, like you said, Aaron, more than 1 per unit, we're
They don't have to.
they'll say, hey, we got 1, we met the requirement. So to change it, it should be specific to the B1, so it's not broadly applied across town,
I think that
if it's changed at all.
if
So-
it's changed at all, I
Yeah.
think that the consensus for us as a group was don't change it, but allow, once you know what type of business, what type of residential is going in, you can lower it by special permit for that specific development, depending on what it is. It's much easier to say to someone, if they come to you and say, I have a bar, I'm only gonna have people on Friday and Saturday nights, the rest of the time it's gonna be minimal, can you lower my parking requirements, please? Sure, that's easier to do than to say, like he says, than to take an apartment complex, that's too bad I put 1 in, that's all I needed, and make them raise it. Keeping it a little bit higher and allowing it to be lowered would, to us, would solve the problem, rather than lowering it and expecting people to do the right thing. Because I'm not sure, I know when someone's building and developing and their money's on the line, that they're just gonna do the right thing, because it's the nice thing to do when they don't have to.
And did the the benefit of reducing the parking spaces, did that ever get communicated? Because I didn't hear it come up in this conversation. So reducing the number of spaces, that increases the building size. And there's a very wise man that's on the planning board with me, and he said, look, in the last 10 years, not a lot of development has occurred. If we make the proper changes, we're trying to drive development. This was one of those changes that would allow people to maximize their lot, get more building on their lot. I don't hear that in this conversation. I didn't hear it that particular night, and I think that's one of the shortcomings in conveying all of these changes to the town. Under the high-level heading, we're making changes for this purpose, and here's what this change, how this enables that purpose.
That's
that
a good
fair?
point. It's a good point, yeah.
So, Rich, for 194 Main Street, it started out at 1.5 spaces per unit. And then once it was switched to non-age restricted, they dropped their units to 60, and now it's around 1.8.
Right. Yeah. So I think we could definitely have a little more, hopefully clearer about the parking and the intent of it, so to potentially make some changes to it or leave it. Regardless, it should be directed towards the B1 and not broadly applied, and I think that makes sense to do that.
Shared parking's tied to this parking conversation, right?
Yes.
That gets us to
Yep.
uses.
Yeah. And not to, on the same parking, so the way, we have this, we have that future reservation that Susan was talking about that was problematic, that we can talk about. So we'll revisit parking, I guess.
But so the issue with the uses wasn't necessarily the uses, because they were changed very little, if I remember
Yeah.
correctly. I think the issue with the uses was the whole primary versus secondary building.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that we need to belabor that here. We need to do better than we did.
Yes.
I'm sorry, were you talking about allowed uses?
Well, yeah, in the allowed uses, I don't think there was much conversation about the actual list of allowed uses, because I think we only made one change.
Well, so, I'd like to add one. So,
Sure.
and I'm not sure, not having thought about starting a veterinary hospital in the town of Norfolk. You got medical, dental, optical, where's the veterinary hospital? Why can't I put a veterinary hospital in the middle of town?
Maybe because there's kennels associated with it.
Not necessarily. No, there might be cages where animals are hospitalized, but I don't have any kennels at my animal hospital, right smack in the middle of Boston. So that was my contribution to, because I was talking to someone on the,
Is that listed as one of the things that's prohibited?
I don't know.
it's just not stated.
I'm also noting that you've committed to opening a veterinary hospital in downtown.
There we go.
I think one of the things that, for the people who weren't part of the advisory meeting or didn't watch it, because obviously they're pretty boring, nobody really wants to watch them, is that when you're stating what the uses are for the front buildings, correct me if I'm wrong, we're discussing the ones that could be the same height, but the business had to be in the front and the residences had to be in the back. Is that
Primaries, right?
primary or secondary? There was no existing, I don't know the right word to use, zoning requirement that would restrict some. From what we deduced in the meeting is that the only way you're gonna get people to develop in here is if you allow residential. There's no market for straight commercial because they can't make any money off of it. Square footage for commercial property is
Not based on the population we currently have in town.
not, well, it's also just, if you rent a business out, its square footage is $27 a square foot, whereas, a house in Norfolk is $200 a square foot.
Right.
So
Yep.
it's obviously more profitable to build houses. So to help our tax space, we want businesses to come in. The problem is that there's nothing in here that says that they can't just put in a laundromat or something for their tenants. That doesn't actually increase the tax base for us at all. or an ATM, an empty room with some ATM machines in there. Again, doesn't it help us with our tax base? And I think that a lot of residents would like to see businesses go into the B1 district that will help offset the tax base, because I would assume the biggest problem with people, more so than getting rid of green space, more so than 40B, more so than anything else, is that our tax rate is ridiculously high and we're always asking for more money, which I'm not saying it's not needed. I am part of this process. I know when budgets come in, I get it, those things have to be paid for. We need a new police officer, we need a new truck. I totally understand it, but we're always asking for something. We're always trying to build. We're putting on $1 million new roof and we're adding a $20 million addition, and there's no business to help offset that. Everything we're putting in is a secondary drain on the current resources. Even if it's a 55 and older, even if it's a nursing home, there's still a drain on police, fire, power, water. Not to mention if it's homes, it's a drain on the schools. So we need to make sure that when we're discussing the uses, that have something in there. If this is our wish list, because I believe that's what we're looking at, because we're just trying to get our idea of how to shape the B1 to keep 40B from taking over and us having being able to have a say in the vision. If that's what we're doing, I think we should try to put in something that states it can't be a business that just doesn't produce any capital. It needs to be something that's going to help offset the tax base in this town.
I think that's a good point, but I just don't believe that the amount of retail space or business space in the B1 district in Norfolk is going to generate enough money to offset everybody else's property
I
taxes
don't think
for
it's
their
going,
homes.
I don't think it necessarily has to offset it completely. I think it would be nice if it was,
It would
if it
contribute
would even
some.
out and maybe not be as much, help those properties not be a drain. Right now, what we're doing is, we're going into this with this motto of, if we build it, they will come. Except we still have empty apartments above the bank. So there's not a huge market for apartments in Norfolk. So we're building them, and yet we have no idea if we're going to fill them. Because again, those haven't even filled yet. So why not say, if you want to build these apartments, you're taking the chance they're gonna sit empty, we're taking the chance that they're gonna be full. The compromise is, you're going to put businesses of a certain type in here that are going to actually
I think we
something.
discussed that with Josh, though, right? That was a whole big conversation about, could they potentially put in like a community room and expect it to, generate traffic? I mean, we had talked about that. so
Right,
that
that's
was
what we
something-
said to him. We said,
Well,
what's to stop them from doing
the
that?
converse of that is the 4 one-bedroom units went before they were done built. So the next building could be all one bedrooms and they'll all go before they were built. And we could-
Yeah,
There's
Rich,
different
how
ways
long
to
have
go
we
down
sat
that.
at 0 occupancy for rental units in Norfolk? Pretty much for the entire time before this building
Yeah.
was built, right?
Yes.
I mean,
Well, there were none.
I think we need to see how this works out. I think we need some more time to identify what the impact of something like that is going to be able to identify, hey, look, this is representative of what's going to happen moving forward with everything we do. I think it's a great idea to focus on the impact of the different types of businesses and residences and percentages as they would have on our tax base looking forward. However, I don't think that we should make that be the only qualifier for if that's going to work for us or not. I think there's things that are not measured in that way, like quality of life additions for residents, that wouldn't necessarily have that same kind of impact on our tax rate. And I think he was absolutely correct. There is not enough commercial and retail zoned area in Norfolk to have a measurable impact on our taxes. That just doesn't exist as it is today. It does not mean that we shouldn't keep it top of mind, though, and ensure that the things that we're putting in there aren't going to have the adverse effect to what we're looking for.
I mean, it would, a Brothers Market, which is what we're talking about, an under 20,000 square foot grocery store, would,
They've been approached
helpful.
and they
No,
don't
no,
want to
no.
do it.
I didn't mean Brothers Market actually would want to come in. Earlier, we said that you're gonna put a cap, we talked about putting the cap of 20, because the vision was this town could support a Brothers Market type store. So I was just using that wording, I wasn't actually saying them. They would help offset the tax base. So that was part of the thing, is why limit,
I have a question on this aspect, because tax basis is obviously a big question and one that I don't know that we fully explored. Like, who in town's the right person to talk to about that? Is there a person that can
Tax
speak,
assessor?
that can speak to how you improve the tax basis?
How they would impact.
Yeah, what businesses should be targeted, or how to target it, or You know,
What is the business tax rate versus the personal property?
It's the same.
It's the same, which is far different. So I have a business in Boston, and I pay a huge amount of real estate tax versus what my next door neighbor who lives in a house pays.
I looked into
I also
that.
pay
Most-
personal property tax too.
Most of our neighbors have a similar thing. I think Walpole's the only one that has a higher tax basis for commercial.
I think, again, sometimes I'm not, I like to think I'm fully versed, but I'm not always, so apologies. I believe what helps with the tax base is even if they're taxed at the same rate as a resident owns a home, pays that tax one time, never generates any further income for the town. I believe the sales tax, it generates from anything they sell, any goods they sell, any services they sell, anything that has a sales tax on it is what generates the tax base for the town. Am I wrong about that? So, yeah, they may be taxed at the same rate as a resident, but the resident isn't bringing in any further income, whereas a business would.
Yeah, so
So-
the only, so consumptive tax, you have meals tax that you can collect locally, and the hotel tax. But beyond that, the regular sales tax goes to the state and
Goes
it
to the
gets
state,
trickled back
yeah.
down. There's
I
no,
pay sales tax and it goes to the state, it doesn't
yeah,
go to
there's
the
no ability to
Boston.
collect.
But again, I mean, Josh has made the case, and I think would make it again, that mixed-use projects generally positively impact your tax performance in your town, which is a reason to promote mixed-use development. I guess the question is just like, is there someone in town that is up to speed with this conversation and could help this board understand it better?
Again,
Or someone in another town, sorry.
Yeah.
So I pay real estate tax quarterly, I pay personal property tax, so they tax me on the equipment that's in my building quarterly, and then I also pay monthly sales tax to the state. So I would think that the real estate tax and the personal property tax goes to the city of Boston, because those are to whom I write the checks out to. But the sales tax goes to the state. So I don't know if there's personal property tax on businesses in town, but that would be.
So within the report, there is an economic piece, I mean, not a full dissertation on it, but that mixed use does have at least from the mix of uses, has a more positive revenue point of view to the town. I think generally this fundamental idea was that the residential hopefully would help subsidize development costs so that the commercial per square foot would go down. So that's kind of the formula that's been out there.
I don't think it was that at least I wasn't one of them on the advisory board. I don't think it was the board's concession that we were opposed to mixed use altogether. I think it was just more ensuring that the businesses that go in would help offset the drain that any of the rental or purchased condominium units would create. Because no matter what, even if you can get a 55 and older, there's still a drain on the
Sure,
resources.
yeah.
Even if you're looking at just straight the water, having to go into the water for residential. So, I mean, we were just trying to, the point is we're not debating whether or not you should or should not allow mixed use. We as a collective board did not have a problem with that. It was more ensure that the businesses that are there are actually going to help offset what the residents are draining.
I feel like
At
they're,
least minimally. I mean, at this point, anything that helps offset those resources is a plus. I mean, I would think.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned the commercial side of the uses was not accessory, so to speak, to the residents above, right?
Exactly.
Is that what you were saying?
One of them was, we said, don't, put in a building this tall in the front that says, hey, we have an ATM, and then it's just a big open vestibule, and then, 6-unit high, apartments in the back. And that's why he was saying that's where the primary and secondary comes in, and that was we just want to make sure that the primary is the business and the secondary is the residences.
Well, again, we need to have that whole conversation again, because there's only 2 lots in town, that's some more multiple buildings, so we'll have that conversation again. But I do want to pick up on something Susan said, which was the infrastructure, because it was another big concern. So, the town itself has seen 20% growth over the last 20 years. It's projected to grow the same amount in the next couple of years, which again the 20% exceeds the amount of units that we're putting in the center of town, which would lead me to believe that if the town was planning responsibly for infrastructure growth, that there would be budgets or estimates or something out there for roads and sidewalks and gas and water and sewer and for an expected 20% growth over the next 20 years. Is that individual departments that would do that?
Well, yeah, the town planner and the town, sorry, you're the town planner, apologies for that. The town administrator and the financial planner bring us their budget every year, and they have a projected 5-year growth on their budget. They have not planned for that. I think it's more
For
of-
population growth, you mean?
Yeah. They have not planned, they've only planned normal cost of living increases on for their the school did, they sent it, when they brought their budget to us last year, they had in there the $20 million build out and how they were gonna move everybody around, move pre-K over to Freeman and keep HOD, kindergarten first and second. Because right now, they don't have, this year alone, they're eliminating all their special classrooms just to accommodate the new incoming kindergarten class. It went from 5 to 8, I believe, so they needed 3 additional classrooms, so they're getting, just to accommodate the next upcoming year, they're getting rid of the art room, the music room, and the computer room, so the kids don't go to.
I don't think that's definitive. I think that's what they're saying. If everything works out as
Everything works
projected,
out and they
that's
have
what
their-
they're gonna have to do,
If they
right?
have the number that they've projected based on the preschool population and come into
Right.
the school, that's what they're going to need to do to accommodate. So the point is if you're talking about 20% growth, a couple thousand people, how many of them have kids? I don't know. How many people are gonna leave town at the same time that those people come in? I don't know. But that's what they're saying, and they're saying within the next 5 years, they're gonna have to do the build-out on Freeman. It's $20 million. We haven't finished paying for the police station yet. We haven't even started on the fire station yet, which is in 14 million? Sorry,
Fire
I have all these
station's-
numbers in my head.
Fire station's
7?
on the side right now.
It's
We're
on the
not-
side, whatever.
a different
We still
board.
have a lot of, I'm simply saying that, apologies, I try to remember everything, but the numbers start mixing together over time. That's a lot of money that you're asking, that, not you personally are asking, but people, the town is being asked to cover.
Yeah.
If you can come to them at Springtown meeting with a plan that shows them that there's gonna be some businesses and some residences and how it's not gonna be a drain and how it can help offset some of the future costs, you're gonna have a much better chance of getting it passed. I mean, sometimes people can't see, I know you probably think I came in here and all I'm doing is arguing with you guys and arguing with what you've been working on for the last 5 months. That's not my goal. My goal is honestly to help you get to a place that's gonna pass. I mean, I don't sit on the advisory board and just go, let me just throw out everything that all these other committees have worked on. None of us do that. We're appointed because of who we are. We're well-versed, and the person that appoints us knows us, and he has researched us, and some of us have a business background that he likes, and some of us have a political background that he likes, and that's how and we have different points of view. So we're not just random people who don't really know what they're talking about. We pretty much know what we're talking about in these situations. We do the research. So we're not trying to get you to get rid of all your hard work. We're trying to get you to see that if you present this work, no matter how hard it was and how much research you did, if you present it in this fashion, whether you presented it in fall or in spring, it's not going to pass. So let's try to figure out how you can. And one thing you need to address is how you're going to help offset the tax base.
So
Bring in
I'm sorry, very
residences.
quickly,
Sorry.
everything that you're providing is exactly what I think everybody needed to come onto this committee and provide. I think this perspective that you're sharing is fantastic, and I think everybody here appreciates that. So don't look at that as a negative in any way, shape, or form. I think this is a fantastic conversation. To tie a loop very quickly on the tax thing, I think it would be of value for us to bring in somebody who could speak more intelligently into the implications of the different mixes and uses that we're talking about, so that we could have that be something more foundational that we can bring into a meeting and identify. We know that XYZ does XYZ to the tax base versus what this would do otherwise. I don't think anybody here can really speak to that at this point, so there would be some great value to having somebody come in to give that perspective. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I agree with you. I think that you brought a lot of interesting information and elucidated why there was so much dissent and negativity, but I guess what I still am having a problem with trying to convey to the town of Norfolk public is that whether or not we decide to do anything or not, or if they vote against it, we're still gonna get a crap load of development in this community that is going to tax the water, tax the school, fire department, everything, with which much less regulation than if we did it correctly. So that's what I think they're missing the big picture of, is that it's gonna happen despite,
I don't think most of the people I've spoken to don't think that. They don't think it's not, if you say no to this, nothing's gonna happen and the lots are gonna stay empty. I don't think that. I think they're just saying, it's like that old, don't give the horse away with the cart. Like, don't give it away up front. Like, figure out a way to get, if we're trying to have a vision for the town of Norfolk, then let's have the vision. Let's have the vision be correct. And let's work towards that goal and getting what we want. Instead of just giving everything away and not getting what we want out of it and not helping ourselves for our future, let's try to shape it the way we really want it. And if we end up losing out to a 40B, we were going to lose out to it anyway. There's not much we can do about that. But giving it away up front means we're never going to have the vision and we're never going to have the downtown area we want. And I think that someone in town, as far as planning or zoning, not this specific B1 committee, but some whoever's also part of those, there needs to be a focus on how do you actively get to your 40B max without necessarily having to do it all in the same district in the B1. How can you do one set over here and one set out on 115 and another one on 1A and spread them out a little bit, put them in a more two-lane highway area, not in the middle of town in a rotary where we can't even get through if you're replacing the cobblestone. We have to go all the way around. I mean, you're going to put another 60, 100 units in there. What are you going to do next year when they're, or 5 years from now, obviously, because it's not being built yet, when they're replacing the cobblestone?
I guess it just depends on who has property for sale in those other areas.
Yeah. Well, two of them are part of the Stop and Shop
But that-
deal, correct?
Again, that gets us back to one of the reasons we're here, which is actually to bring that density to the B1
Yep.
district. So, because it's perceived as a benefit. I also think we should look at other options outside of the B1 district, personally.
So just a point that you just mentioned density again, and we're talking about some of the things outside of these areas, but just that we should address in the general discussion and in the teeing up of why we're even making these recommendations. And we kind of got away from it, but I remember in the initial discussions, Josh was really harping on the residential is a benefit for the builders because that's how they can make more money per square foot. Like, that's clear. But Josh also had some points around the required density, and he had some stats around proportions that would then become attractive to the types of businesses that we're looking for, restaurants and things like that. Josh had some stats where he was saying, like, no restaurants aren't going to come unless you have, he had numbers. We basically haven't heard any of that discussion since maybe our first or second meeting. Maybe an opportunity to, again, because we know that there's going to be concern around the housing and the fact that we're pushing mixed use. That might be another area to go back to when we're thinking about this discussion.
Yeah.
Again, the benefits of why we need housing. We need to meet our requirement. We're not going to do that solely, and we don't want to do that solely in B1.
Right.
We want some, but not all. But also that will then make it attractive for the businesses that we do want, right?
Right. I mean, in theory, you've got
Brothers in the
60
restaurant,
going
the
in at Bork's. You've got another 8 going in at the one.
Pondville?
main- The one that's going to end up being right behind Bork's, but it's the houses that looks like Boyd's. Forget what the exact address. 125 Rockwood Road.
Oh, 25 Rockwood.
25 Rockwood Road.
yeah,
Sorry. You got, I think, 8 there because it's 25%, right? And they're putting 32 in, something like
Yep,
that.
yep.
And then let's say you could get Stop and Shop. Stop and Shop does give up the lease, and then that person who owns that land sells it or develops it themselves, and you could get another 50 or 60 units in there, but mostly 1 and 2 bedrooms, so they're not necessarily a drain on the school. All right, they're not 40B, they're through our zoning, and we can have a nice restaurant there, and an ice cream shop, and a retail store, and a gym, whatever that could go in. That increases the tax base. That also, because all 60 of those units would count for affordable housing, then, you're up to 120, right?
So what you just identified is the push and pull that we've been
Yep.
working with for the last 9 months,
gotta
right?
put
You
that in.
have over here the set of developers who say, I need to be able to do X amount of residential, substantiate any commercial, because I'm not going to have my commercial sit there and me pay taxes on it and not have anything be there because it can't be supported. And over here, we have some residents who have identified that we don't want no residential. We want just the commercial there. We want the storefronts. We don't want any apartment buildings in downtown. We don't want the traffic. We don't want anything associated to it. That is our expectation. So where does that leave us?
In the middle.
We have to continue to do this push and pull and say, okay, well, you don't need that many. How many do you really need? Okay, well, you have to have some residential substantially. And you got to find yourself in this middle area right here, and that's essentially what we've been doing. Now, is there opportunity for us to pull back a little bit on this one, push a little bit on this one? Absolutely, and I think that's going to be one of the biggest focuses as we go into the next year, to be able to find that happy medium with all this input from the community, with balancing it against the vision of the town via the master plan and the other reports that have been done, via this committee, via the other supporting boards and committees out there. That's going to be the main goal for us as we go through this next couple of months. It's not easy. There's a
not. I think
lot of
it's-
dark area there.
I think it comes down to language.
Yep.
I maybe, when I first started, you guys thought I was opposing everything. That wasn't, I hope that's not what it came across as, because that was never my intention. I think it just comes down to language, just making sure that you're explaining to the residents what their worst-case scenario is by zoning right, and what you'd like to see, having a plan and a vision, and explaining that this is what is needed. And no matter what, they're going to get residences, because if we don't do it, 40B is going to do it. So it helps us. It also gives us the vision that we want. As long as I think there's not a lot of explanation to the town.
Yeah.
And I think that's, you've got your old-time people who are just going to get up and complain about everything no matter what, and you've got your younger people who are just moving in and they're trying to get involved, and you've got
Right.
your people in the middle. But you've got to explain it to them, and having people speaking and having people understand what it is, and then being able to say to that one person who gets up at town meeting and talks for 10 minutes because they just decided to get involved this year, then you can say to them, you're misunderstanding. Here's what the vision is. But right now, it's not here. So that's, I think, what you got to get to. So, and you got to do it fairly. You got to do it with not making it look like you're playing favorites, and not making it look like you're trying to shape something a certain way by pushing certain people out, and, not making it, unfortunately, sometimes it looks like some people benefit and some people don't, and people get their,
Bad perception.
Yeah.
Yep.
so you want to make sure that, there's not anybody sitting on the board that's voting for this stuff that benefits from it. That's another one. There's sometimes that's not always the case. So the more explanation you can have, the more worst-case scenario language you can put in there so people know, and the better explanation you can give, I think you have a good shot at getting it passed.
I think it's also important too, though, while we talk about being able to address each of those concerns that come up, there's going to be people, we talked about the residents who just want residential. There's people who are over here who say, I want green space.
Yeah.
I don't want anything over there ever. I like my town with dirt roads, horse-drawn carriages, no traffic lights. That's my expectation for the town of Norfolk. I like my sleepy farm town.
I mean, if
And-
you're asking me as a resident, I'm with them.
Yeah, and-
I'm way over there. I am
In
saying,
no way,
don't
shape, or
develop
form-
anything else. I like this town the way it is.
I don't want to try to convince them that this is the way we have to go.
Right,
That's
but
their
that's not
opinion.
logical.
But
Exactly.
that's what their thought process is. So if they get up and say, this is what I want, thank you. We appreciate your input. I'm not going to try to argue against that. That's
Right.
what you want. So we have to be cognizant of that as well. There's going to be people who have those kinds of opinions that aren't going to be able to be met with justification or rationale or any reasoning.
I think those. I think the majority of people. I hope, at least the majority of people I encounter, are a little bit like I am, which is, I would love to see this stay a sleepy little town with cute side roads and maybe a few sidewalks in, and all of our 100 and 200-year-old trees. It's awesome. But I also know that's not possible. So I think most people are like that. They want it, but they know it's not possible. So how can you do it but still make everything look as good as it does right now? Because sometimes when you go into other towns that are similar in size, they don't look as nice. So how can we do it and still maintain the quaintness of Norfolk?
You know, personally, when we were here years ago, one of the bills that come up for a town meeting or something was, didn't they reduce the amount of money that went into the Conservation Commission from the sales?
3 to 1, yeah.
On the sale of your home? So that took a huge chunk of money away from the ability to the town to buy and retain open space. So sometimes our own town people vote against their own self-interests.
Oh, many,
Because-
many times.
And for like $100.
Yeah.
I mean, really, that was the amount of money that was coming off of what they were paying, and it was just,
I've said
it
that
was
for
ridiculous.
a while about Cleveland Street because they didn't want a pig farm. Didn't want a pig
Right.
farm. Didn't want a pig farm. No to the pig farm. It's
Now you
gonna
get
smell
32
bad.
units.
Now you've got a 40B unit
That's
across
right.
the street. Sometimes what you rally against is you cutting off your nose to spite your face. You're going to get
Absolutely.
something much worse. So I think that's why we have to put in the restrictions at the cap and then explain it to everybody what you're actually going to
More
get.
money into conservation.
That'd be nice.
Well, I think that fundamentally, that's what we were trying to do, to put in some safeguards, but also some incentives so people don't revert back to options that people don't want to see. So that's, maybe it's trying to get a little bit better balance. I think that's part of what we heard, I think, at least I heard, I think, going through the advisory board. I think the one question I like is that the notion that, and I heard, you know, why are we doing this? I mean, the thing is, collectively, the framework zoning, we regulate how land gets developed, okay? And then sometimes I feel like that's kind of misplaced in things, so we are, because I've definitely heard, why are we helping the property owner, or why are we helping the developer? And we're doing it all the time. We're saying how properties develop, what kind of uses can go here, what dimensional requirements. So we're already kind of in that business, so I think getting that message out that it's trying to strike a balance and regulate to get the outcomes that you want to see happen. Because I share your opinion, but I'm not sure that 66% of the people out there, not a majority, 66% of the people realize that no growth is not a real thing.
Right. Well,
That's the hardest part, I think, in some respects with this, is that I agree with you. I think a lot of people realize no growth is not a real thing because we're telling people how to grow. This is how we're saying this town is going to develop. So then we have the property rights that we build into that. So if we don't want people to develop, we have to have them guide them in a certain way, or we have to compensate them if we're going to try to take away their right to develop their property. Where I think some people come to the table where they want no growth at all. But put them in the position of them owning that property and they want to develop it, they have the rights too. So striking that balance, I feel like is missing a little bit.
well, I think that's always the case. As a resident who lives in Norfolk, I don't want a marijuana shop, a marijuana dispensary here. But as someone who pays taxes and understands that a marijuana shop would pretty much pay for the entire addition of Freeman, I can say that that would be a good thing.
Can we
So
just
how
write
do you-
one for a limited time?
Right,
period?
like how do you find the balance in that? How do you explain to people that, I get it, you don't want a pot shop near you and in your town because you want to maintain a quaint town, but you also don't want to pay $20 million for an addition, so where's the middle ground? I mean, I think that's always what you're doing, everybody. And you're trying to, for someone like me who lives here, I actually live just outside of the B-1. I live right on the other side of Castle Road and Wright's Farm, so I live very close to that. So I, of course, want it to look as good as it possibly does, or possibly can. Selfishly, but at the same time, I also understand that not everyone, there's people who are struggling to pay the high taxes of Norfolk and the feelings of not getting what they're paying in with the roads and the schools and the overcrowding and, you know, the bad water and whatever else is going on Facebook that people are complaining about. So I don't personally have bad water, but I'm sure that there are a lot of people who do. So I mean, that's just finding a way to get people to agree to pass this is what you've got to do. And the way to do that is to make sure you assuage all of their nervousness about it. Show them how it's not going to be a bad thing. Show them what the worst case scenario will look like. And I think that that's how you're going to get people on board.
The one suggestion that was also mentioned to me is for this, probably this committee as a whole, is to just tackle one topic at a time. Maybe as we go forward to speak to it. So for one, maybe one of the agenda item is focused around the housing piece, and we just speak to that particular one. So for the residents who are watching and want to become informed, it's not bouncing all over the place, because I think, I had
You mean
heard.
in a meeting?
Yeah, in a
So
meeting.
have one meeting that addresses the density and the height?
Yeah.
And say, if you have questions about this, come to
Right.
this meeting, submit
We'll
your
talk
questions.
about density and height.
We'll
Right.
ask them. I mean,
Because it seemed like, I think there's a lot of moving parts sometimes, and, trying to follow the bouncing ball, as you just said, I mean, it's tough as it is when you're more informed on things. Now, the person who's not following this stuff all the time, it gets even more cumbersome. So maybe if we tackle maybe by topic, it might help.
My only concern with that is, one of the key points of the success of this whole thing was the cohesiveness of how each of these works with each other, right? And how some of these different pieces, they make more sense when you hear them as a whole, how they work with each other. If we start focusing on one individual topic on one night, I feel like we lose some of that cohesiveness in that, we could talk about the density in the B-1 district, and we go through density to a core. But then the next time that we get together and we talk about building height, that has a direct impact on density, and all of a sudden, that conversation that was just had where everybody feels like they're in a great place, now goes out the window because we're talking about something different when it comes to building height.
is your goal as the committee, or I guess technically our goal now, but is our goal to pass all of them? The reason I say that is because at one point you had them bundled together and then we separated them out. I think if you personally, if you keep them bundled, if you want them bundled, you're not, you stand a much greater risk of it failing. Because there's going to be someone who always has a problem with a piece of it. If you keep them separate, you have a better chance of, say, 5 of the 7 passing. I'm not picking out one specific,
No, I
I'm
understand.
just using it as an example.
We talked about that quite a bit.
But as a committee, do you feel if you don't get them all, then it wasn't worth it to get anything? If that's the case, then you should keep them together and explain that. If we can't get them all, we don't want any of them, because they all go together. I think that's also part of what, when this is being rewritten and reworked, that needs to be, that needs to be answered by you guys.
I'll speak
What
for
are
the
you
committee
seeing?
and the planning board in this case, because we talked about the planning board too, and of course, please correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think we talked about it and decided that bundled was the right thing to do for some of the things that Kevin was mentioning, which is it's kind of a cohesive whole that we're talking about downtown, and to a large extent, if one part drops out, it negatively impacts other parts and pieces of it.
And
That's the short version of a long conversation, but we can certainly have that conversation again.
That's going to be tougher to pass, in my opinion, just an opinion. So you're going to need to do a bigger campaign of explanation up front.
And so let's talk about that real quick, because it's December. So if we're targeting a May meeting for something, and as we were talking sort of before the meeting, that means we'd need to get to the advisory board 5 weeks before the spring meeting, which is the beginning of April. So that means we're talking about meeting three more times
That's it.
before we're in front of the advisory board.
I think we should meet 3 more times, at least, to figure out how to word everything, but I think you're right, you should, setting up a presentation, maybe you do that the first time you go to the advisory board and you just make it, obviously they're always public, but you really post it, like, not just the one post that says, hey, if you follow, there's some of these things you have to follow Norfolk Town government to even know these meetings are happening. If you post on the Norfolk community page, here's what's going to be discussed, here's what time, here's what room, if you have questions, come with them prepared, we're only gonna have 3 hours, and have a presentation and allow time for questions as you go or at the end, I think it'll have a better outcome of people not being more informed before town meeting and not just showing up to oppose it at town meeting because they heard, oh, we're trying to put apartment units in downtown. I don't know if you have time for that, but that would be my opinion. And you don't have to do a town meeting, you can just present to either the planning board or the advisory board or the select board, pick a board, doesn't matter, we got a lot of boards here. Pick a board you want to present it to and make that one the main they're all public, but make that the advertised, the public, post it everywhere, make sure people know about it, make sure they're watching it.
I learned a lot from this process over the past 2.5 months. The one thing I learned as a newer student is that the advisory board is relied upon heavily by the resident who's not as engaged in the process, for what it's worth, right? So-
Absolutely. I mean, they have a recommendation on the warrant, and people
Yeah, I
take a lot of
agree.
heed to that.
I
yeah.
agree.
So, having said that, it would seem that I'd like to have the committee get to the advisory board sooner than later. Because I think in that last package that went to town meeting, there might be some things that, well, number one, we discussed potentially putting a consistent cap, okay, tonight. We may not have all the parking, there may be pieces of the parking, and just kind of talk it through, and then talk about the fact that, you know, there are other reports that were relied on to develop this plan, the cohesiveness, the housing production, kind of do, when I went to the advisory board, it wasn't, you know, as I was advised, I didn't really go in there to like to make a pitch for this, okay? I was there more of a Q&A kind of thing, which obviously in retrospect was.
I think that we were more than he thought going in.
Were, you know, I was, hey, keep it concise. Well, that was the last board to go into to be concise about, quite honestly, because I think all the questions that came up was condensing essentially 10, 11 months of work into one night to kind of weave everything together. You know, it was the master plan that's been developed by the town that we were trying to create that vision. It was the housing production plan that we're trying to work towards you know what I mean, all those pieces to weave it together. So I feel like getting to the advisory board is an opportunity to have them hear it and critique it and see how it is.
That board is a tough board for something like this, because you've got somebody on there who's, you know, you've got engineers on there, you've got energy consultants on there, you've got someone who works with CPC and affordable housing on that board. So you've got a lot of opinions on that, and a lot of people who know what they're talking about. You got financial advisors, and I think there's even a rocket scientist. I'm not kidding. So it's one of those boards where you gotta know what you gotta be prepared for a lot of questions. So
Right.
they do that simply for the reason Jay does that, so that when it comes to town meeting and you're listening to the town's listening to the recommendations, they can feel confident in knowing that the people that are there did the research, asked the right questions, have the background to understand the answers when they're getting them, you know, and it's fairly represented, you know, politically and ideology, so socially.
And the thing is, go into that body, at the same time, they all have expertise in certain areas. So bringing some expertise to that board to say, look, I mean, I know this is your particular area of study, but how zoning operates and land use operates and so forth, they can have a little dialogue back.
But as we sit here today, we have a report that's still not public, and a well-stated desire to educate the town and various boards more as to what we're doing. Right? We have 3 months to do that if we're targeting the spring meeting for something. So it's not a significant period of time. I think we got to get our act together and figure out, you know, what we're doing.
Is it part of your committee rules that you can only meet once a month?
No.
So you say 3, but you could have 5.
Good.
And I think that another community feedback session was absolutely part of the intent of what we were going to do going into Springtown meeting. We held 2 of them during the previous 9-month run, one of which was pretty well attended, the other one not so much. But I think as part of this, the idea was to address these outstanding and highlighted concerns, put those into a clearer, more well-defined outline, and then using that for the basis of a community feedback session where we address all these concerns, hear what people have to say, meet one more time, then we hit the boards.
I also think that there's a good number of people who understand that B-1, what it is, where it's located, what it encompasses, but there's a huge portion of people who don't know what B1 is. I've had many conversations where I'm like, oh, I'm doing such and such with the B1. We had the B1 presentation. They're like, what is that? I had to tell a lot of people what it was. So maybe instead of calling it B1, we call it Downtown Development Project. People understand what you're talking about.
Well, in the report, we have some fantastic
I'm
colored
saying-
diagrams now that will
You're
identify.
relying on people to read the report.
Oh, no, that will
Yes.
become the cover
Yes.
page. That will become everything
Yeah,
we
I just-
share moving
I
forward.
think that having B1 dash downtown development, whatever you want to do, I just think making it well known that what area of town you're talking about, because I truly don't think a lot of people understand. I told multiple people about B1 and they're like, what is that? Didn't know what I was talking
The
about.
title of the report is Norfolk Town Center, B1 District Zoning Study.
Perfect.
We're headed in the right direction.
So I think you said earlier that you schedule, or you have to speak to the chair and then schedule as,
Whoever is the chair of this committee should contact Arthur and Sue Jacobson and ask for ask for an earlier meeting, other than what you would normally get once the warrants were requested. Ask for an earlier meeting to present to us. That way, if there's anything, you have time. Because if you wait till 3 weeks before, that means you meet with us on a Wednesday, April 5th. You've got to have your changes done 2 weeks after that to come back to, because we can't vote on it until you actually make the changes. If you're gonna make changes, we can't vote until you make them. We can't vote just on your word that you're gonna do it. You have to actually do
So
them.
picking up on what Kevin's saying, though, is like, I think we started at the beginning of this conversation, I said, well, maybe we need Josh to make a presentation. Maybe we need to have Josh make a presentation to the advisory committee. And at that, he'll make his presentation. After his presentation, we can get together and say, you know, based on that and all the feedback we received, these are the modifications we've talked about. And then after that, we can have a public feedback session based on an educated change.
Because now we have consensus going into it.
To where we
Yeah,
were.
no, that makes sense. That does make sense, yeah.
Will Josh be just presenting what we already are proposing, or are we gonna take the recommendations from Susan and the advisory committee on the 7 things that we need to address?
I think we need to do both. I think, one, I think it would be a disservice to the town to not have Josh present this in a public atmosphere when we videotape. There's so much good information in this report.
He did it
Good-
already,
Good or bad.
right?
He
Didn't
didn't present the report,
Okay,
right? He presented concepts and ideas, and it was always in the concept of what we were changing,
okay.
right? I think his presentation is less about what we're proposing and more about what he learned in the last year, right? Which is what this report is, which is summarized by the proposals we made. I think we let him present the information, and then we follow it up with, this is the executive summary, and this is the input we received, and this is how we've reacted to the input, and go from there.
I'm not saying you have to do, you don't have to do what the advisory board says. You're a board, we're a board. You certainly can make your own decisions. I'm simply saying if some of this stuff in the summary doesn't get changed, it still won't get approved by the advisory board, which means it's a good chance it won't get approved at town meeting, because a lot of people listen to the recommendations of the advisory board. So, unfortunately. So I'm certainly not telling you have to do that. You have to take a look at what works for you and your planning and your research and your development that you've already done so far. But having a meeting where Josh explains it is great, but if you haven't made some progress in the change, because they're still gonna give you feedback that night. When you make this presentation, they're gonna tell you even more, probably more than I was even able to remember, or you were even able to remember, you know. And you may or may not wanna listen, you may or may not wanna make those changes as well. So I think going into it, saying that you've made some of them, will just take up a whole lot less time. If there's any in here that we've talked about that you're willing to take a look at and change.
Yeah, so there's, I mean, like I mentioned to you, go through Josh's report, there's a cap.
Yeah.
That was a recommendation after the town meeting, you know, after that process went through. There are, some of them might be worthwhile just to to hear the presentation and digest the issues in the report. So some of the questions you had asked about density, Janine, about incentivizing, he has laid out in the report, different densities, units per acre, which don't incentivize mixed-use development and which have incentivized mixed-use development. So it's kind of a combination, right? I mean, I think the parking is, we talked about this quite a bit, him and I, is he can present the facts of the parking, of how, the movement is towards less parking, but at the same time, people have a real strong opinion about parking, irrespective of the facts. And so there might be things related to parking you might just not want to touch. I mean, interesting enough, I just read, as a side, Brookline, they wanted to go from 2 parking spaces per unit down to 1.5, and it was recommended against by the advisory board in Brookline, and it didn't pass. So there's a town which one would look at and say, you know what, there's a lot of walking, biking, transit, so forth, and they couldn't even go from,
There's not enough parking in Brookline.
not enough parking.
There's not enough parking in Brookline.
So, again, everybody has opinion about parking, so it might be something that he talks about the rationale, but then the committee decides not to touch it. That's my only point. So could it be a little bit of both in January? It'd have to be early January, I would think, right, at this point?
If you want to have time to make changes and have time
Yeah.
to meet afterwards.
Yeah. You had mentioned earlier, I thought that was Jay that recommended not to have this at its, because when I was at the meeting, the advisory board, I know you mentioned Blythe, but I thought Jay was the one who said this was too important to not be at an annual town meeting.
They may have agreed, but
Yeah, they agreed?
it was Blythe who said if
Okay.
it's this big, I don't want to do a special meeting. And I believe she would be the one to decide it anyway.
No,
No? Who decides it?
the Board of Selectmen.
He seemed to be pretty strongly opinionated about that night.
I agree.
sure Jay-
I think Jay had an opinion in that
Yeah.
as well. No.
Where are
The
we?
conversation I happened to be in.
But that's important schedule related, so if
So
that's,
picking up on that, where are we in the 40B? What's the right word?
it's on the screen.
When you're not allowed to propose a new 40B project in town?
Safe harbor.
Well, there's a couple of instances. Safe harbor is one of them, if we meet a certain production level within a given calendar year. The one that we're actually in right now is when you have too many projects in the queue, right? So we actually have 3 projects in the queue that exceed 200 units.
So I have up on the
It's 3
screen,
projects or more, or
Table.
200 units.
Okay.
So how long are we in this current version of the safe harbor because of these 3?
so we're not in safe harbor right
Not
now.
safe harbor, it's simply,
It's on hold.
we fit a cap in our queue.
So nothing can be added to it until when?
The zoning board of appeals, when the proposal comes up, will vote to stay the project until one of the ones that's currently in the queue leaves the queue. If I have that correct. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Fast forward, hypothetically, the ZBA passes 194 Main Street, there'll be 32 units, there'll be more than 32 units, which would then put the town in safe harbor for 2 years.
Because we have the plan.
What's that?
Because we have that plan now.
The housing production plan is approved by the state, that's right.
Right. We do have the housing. So on the table, on the screen is just my spreadsheet that gives you a rundown of the 40B, where we're at. And,
Is there any reason to rush to spring from a 40B perspective?
so then there's the, and this is kind of the, let's see if I can,
We'll talk about it.
and this is the current spreadsheet for projects that are in the queue. The schedule is an important discussion with this, though, I think.
There's also a new proposed 40B project.
That's only 8 units, right?
There's only 8 units. Yeah.
Project nonetheless.
Still a
Project
40B
nonetheless. No,
project.
you're absolutely right. You're
Still
absolutely right. I
40B.
didn't mean to minimize it.
There's a strong likelihood that by early springtime, we'll be in safe harbor with more than 32 units. So spring is from March, don't forget, to June. So, I mean, I think relatively speaking.
It is only 6 3-bedrooms, sorry.
Yeah.
Apologies, I was wrong.
So, so that's really where we're at relative to 40B. But if I showed you the first table, I mentioned that. So I might take the mic and just go to the screen. Obviously, Devin knows this already, but. So 6 months, once they approve it, you get 6 months until go to the building permit. So some of these, so this one, the board just approved recently. But then they got to go to building permit. So we got to add some of these back. So this one's outside. So those units that were 40B, we don't have in the inventory right now. Sue Jacobson is going to be working with me to go back and get the units. So Boyd's Crossing, this is ownership we're talking about, just quickly. So those units, 6 months you get to hold them, and then after 6 months, if they'll go to the building permit, they drop off, technically speaking, off your 40B inventory. So we got to go back, and we just got an update from the state. We got to cross-reference our numbers against theirs. But so this is completely built out, meeting house. That was just approved. This is under construction. So not all, some of those 40B ownership units are on the inventory. They will be, but they got to go to building permit. And then down below is the projects in the cube, minus the one that was just submitted.
One thing we didn't talk about in terms of negative feedback, constructive feedback that we heard during this process was that this whole thing felt rushed. I would prefer never to hear that people's perception of this process feels rushed again. After talking about this for 9 months and going through all these permutations, revisions, separate meetings, preparing for presentations, all of that, I want to make sure that we do not have a look and feel of this being rushed as we go into the next couple of months. So I think a big piece of that would be to map out what we're looking at specifically from a presentation standpoint, from a community feedback standpoint, from our meetings, as early on as possible, so that that can be out there, identified, and available for people to be able to be included wherever they see fit.
So I think I'll just double check. I think we did cover that in FAQs, and it's back in this report, but might need to consolidate it so people, it's fresh, that what we've gone through. But they are in the report, but we'll make sure it's clear.
So that's the past stuff. Let's talk about what we're looking
My
at.
suggestion is to have the meeting in this room versus our room. This room is way better than our room. These chairs are way nicer. You're very lucky.
So Aaron, I see that you mapped out the calendar over there.
Yeah, but, I mean, we don't, and the calendar's here, but, I mean, we haven't really decided what we want to do. I mean, 2 weeks before the town meeting, the warrant's closed, we've got that established, and the latest we want to talk to the advisory board is 3 weeks before that. So basically, we need to be done talking about things 5 weeks, a minimum of 5 weeks before the town meeting, whether that be spring or fall or whatever it is, right? So in this case, for spring, that means we've got 3 months in front of us to do whatever we might want to do to present our warrant items to the advisory board. So we've talked about having a community feedback meeting. We've talked about meeting more informally with the advisory board. And that's all we've talked about. Somewhere in there, we've got to decide what changes we want to make to our recommendations. So I guess we got to talk to Josh and firm up what their commitment is or isn't. We need to make some edits to the report. We need to decide if we want to have some sort of a joint presentation of the report and our recommendations. If we do, then we've got to make some discussion points on our recommendations before that meeting happens. So maybe we're talking about meeting in January with our proposals, and perhaps Josh, and then maybe in early February, meeting with the advisory board and our updated recommendations for discussion. Maybe the advisory board, the planning board. I'm thinking that's a public meeting, and that meeting's held not necessarily here, but could be at Freeman or something. I'm just talking out loud.
Well, talking out loud, I don't want to underestimate the value of meeting with the advisory board earlier on. I think
Sooner, you mean? Well, what,
in January.
do we think there's value in meeting with the advisory board with a smaller group?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, I'm 99% sure you can request a meeting with the advisory board. With that said, the advisory board is used to, the warrant comes out, we go through it, we say, we don't agree on this, or we all say no to this, so we need some further clarification, right? And we say, okay, we need Josh from the so-and-so board to come in and talk to us. So then next Wednesday, okay, we're all coming, we're gonna listen to Josh next Wednesday for an hour and a half, which is what we did with him. We interrupt, we ask questions, we tell him what we think, he makes notes, however it works. But in the end, we say, these are changes we would wanna see before we would vote. But that's up to you. So you have to decide if you have the time for that. So if your goal is to present to the advisory board and then listen to their recommendations and make changes, then the earlier you can do it, the better. If you're not going to listen to the recommendations and you just want to present so that they're more well-informed and can ask any questions, then it really doesn't matter. 3 weeks before is fine. You see what I'm saying? You just want to make sure you're giving, if you're going to make, if you think you're not going to need any further changes after you make whatever changes you make, or you're going to refuse to make any further changes, which is absolutely your right to do, then you don't need as much time as you think you do. You only need the time if you think you're going to take what the board recommends based on what they have to say that evening and make any changes. I mean, again, the advisory board is there just to advise you. It's there to advise you, and it's there to advise the town. We're not anyone you have to listen to. You did this research, you present your warrant the way you want to present your warrant. Some people like to have the advisory board's approval, some people don't care. It's totally up to you.
I think less about the specific individuals in the advisory board and more about the mentality and position that they represent of the community. I think the concerns that were shared within that small group were representative of some of the concerns that were out in the community long before anybody sat down in that meeting. So I think just by that standard, the fact that you so diligently represent some of the concerns that are out there in the community, it would be probably to our benefit to have that discussion prior to getting to a decision-making point as to what's going to be presented from this committee standpoint. But I'd be welcome to anybody who disagrees.
No, I agree. So just again, sketching in this calendar that I threw out here, and I think we're talking about having another committee meeting, or a board meeting, but it's a committee meeting in January, where we finalize the report and we talk about what recommendations we want to change, with the goal of getting to the advisory board and the planning board in early February, maybe having a public meeting in early March, so that in early April we can hand our warrant to the advisory board.
I think having the public meeting after you present to the advisory board is probably a good idea.
Yeah.
Simply because if there is anything that's significant that you do feel that the advisory board raises that you would agree to change, it's better to do that before you present to the public. Just to head off any anger and riling up of people.
So could we committee meet in January and then try to meet towards the end of January with the advisory board? Just the,
I mean, you just have to request it.
Yeah,
and it's-
see on the
it's- I mean,
schedule. Yeah.
Technically, I guess I can do it, but I don't think I don't think I should. I think,
I think it would come from the committee, right?
yeah.
I mean, the
I mean-
committee should be requesting.
Well, I
the
think it
meeting.
should be the chair, do you have a chair of this?
we don't
committee?
actually technically have a chair for this committee.
Okay. Which
It's
is,
sponsored by the town planner, so technically the town planner would be.
right, so Rich, that's you, so,
Voluntold.
On behalf of the B-1 committee.
yeah, exactly. So just contact Arthur,
Okay.
or Sue, or both of them.
Okay.
And say, you know, we'd like to do a presentation with you guys so we can get your feedback before we present it to the town.
Okay.
Because we want, and explain that you want to present, you want to have an open, not a town meeting, but you want to have an open meeting where anyone can come and ask questions prior to building your warrant, so that you make sure you've got everything in there.
Okay.
Because the advisory committee, when you map it out, was the only one that didn't really get a full interactive dialogue presentation prior to a definitive presentation, definitive recommendation being put forth. All the other boards and committees represented here, for the most part,
Yeah.
got that accommodation. So this would essentially just be tying the loop on ensuring that everybody that's been involved in this process up until this point gets the same kind of opportunity.
Hence why my meeting didn't go so well.
Donna, do you have something you wanted to add?
It was so loud.
Donna Jones, somebody that does follow most of the meetings. And I want to commend you for pursuing this. I think this has been major progress from what we've seen in the past. I know boards are volunteers. They do what they think is best. They bring it to town meeting. People don't know the details of what's gone on, all the work that's gone on. I don't know enough, and they put it off. So I thought, progress, something's going to change. Go for it. If you've still left some holes in it, we'll fix it next time. So I'm glad you're still pursuing getting something done to get some progress here. I have watched the process of somebody has to come up with an article, try to get it the best they can, the legal verbiage or something, and present it to the selectmen. So they've done their presentation with all the details of why I'm asking for this, and do the presentation to the planning board, why I'm asking this, and do the presentation to the advisory board. Luckily, this time we had 2 public input sessions. That was great. You did your best, you advertised it, and people didn't wake up until the day before or so and say, oh, I've got this other thing that's a conflict. Why did there have to be 3 different presentations? Could there be a joint meeting of selectmen, planning board, advisory board members in maybe the library, maybe the school place? And so you all get the information. If it's enough ahead of time, you go back to your individual boards and discuss it.
I don't see any reason why that couldn't happen. I think that the reason why you do it separately is so you can get the input of one board with one scope and one focus to take that input and build it into everything else you're getting outside of that. That being said, I think that there absolutely would be some value to having everybody be there for one message. I don't think the intent was to go to each and every auxiliary board again, the Board of Selectmen, the planning board because of secondary sponsorship, but the ZBA, the Board of Health. I don't think there was an intent to go through that circuit again before town meeting. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, we gotta go to the select board.
Select board to
We gotta
solidify the warrant, right?
Right.
I
You
think.
don't have to present to advisory, but you do have to submit your warrants to us, so.
Yeah.
Right, so it has to
And
happen at some
again,
point or
advisory's
another.
going to have questions, so they're gonna bring
Yeah.
one of you in. I'm already there, so it can't be me.
Mm-hmm.
So they're gonna bring Rich or someone in.
So
to
I
ask
would-
questions. You might as well do a presentation to them, but I don't know that you need to present to
I
everyone.
think you might need to get
Certainly
back.
be invited to any of the presentations that we have, and an invitation could be offered to say, we have no special plans to come see you, but if you'd like us to, we could come summarize what we're presenting.
It depends what you would like to achieve. So, for example, if you want vote of support from the different boards that fill this committee, then you probably do have to go to those boards. I think when I went to the ZBA, they heard the presentation, but they had some reservations, but they didn't actually take a vote on whether support or not. I don't know if, that particular night, I don't know if they would have, I don't think there would have been enough votes to support, but I'm not sure.
My feeling with the ZBA was, the biggest concern was just traffic, not knowing any, repercussions of, what we're proposing, as well as they wanted to see, I think, something more with what are the options from just having a sewer in town center? What development would that open up? And then just, I think, stormwater as well. Just from they were more, I thought, more concentrated on infrastructure as opposed to more of the zoning.
Yeah.
So when you say that, do you mean what could current infrastructure, and I did make it through the meeting, it's a long time ago, I'm sorry, I forget, but was it more focused on what our current infrastructure would support in that area, or was it what could we do to infrastructure to open up additional,
What could be done to infrastructure?
and what
to
would that
open up?
impact be on what we're passing today? Okay, got it. Yeah.
To get to Aaron's point to a degree about capacity, right? So from,
That's not gonna happen in 3 months.
Well, I mean, we have to keep in mind too, we're not building this from scratch again, right? 9 months worth of work is still gonna be here. We're not gonna sit here and go through each individual one and start redlining everything and starting over from scratch. We're gonna use that as a basis for what we're gonna be recommending. We're making tweaks here. So I get that 3 months is a short period of time, but we're not necessarily putting forth the same effort that we did previously. All that being said, I think that getting to Springtown meeting with this is very important. I don't think that holding off a full year to go to Fall Town meeting next year is necessarily going to fulfill the community's expectations. There are some people out there, we've spoken a lot about the people who have been in opposition of this. There's also people who are in favor of this and are looking forward to having the discussion on town meeting. And I think that we owe it to those people as well to get this out there, have this conversation, get these things addressed, get the answers ready for them, and let the community discuss it. Let everybody have their fair share of getting their opinion out there and having the decision be made. So if there's something that we need to do in terms of frequency of meeting, in terms of having presentations, stacking a calendar, whatever it has to be, I think that it's on us to do that, to accommodate that. If we have to meet a couple of times a month instead, I think we should do that. I think we should do whatever we can to ensure that people don't feel rushed, people don't feel like this thing was pushed along ahead of when it was ready, but also that we have all this stuff ready to go and prepared and confidently able to walk into town meeting with all these answers for the folks.
So I understand everybody on the board had input. Who actually wrote the summary?
Who wrote the summary that's Josh.
Josh wrote this? Who
Yeah.
actually wrote the warrants?
it was a combination of Josh and myself.
So is that the way you want to do it next time, the next time too? You want to make the small tweaks and changes and wording and verbiage, right? But keep the same 7 warrants? Or do you want to change it to be 1 warrant?
I think that's up for discussion.
I think you have to have that consensus of that before you go for the advisory. That's
Yeah.
my opinion.
I agree, and I think that's why we need to have another committee meeting in early January to come back, to digest all of the conversation tonight, what our recommendations are, and, set a schedule. We need to get we should have a conversation with the advisory board about what their availability is. We should confirm what Josh's availability is. I think we should certainly invite the planning board to this advisory board meeting. I don't know about the select board.
Okay, so that seems like we have a sequence at least, right? So this committee needs to meet one more time before we go to anybody, right? Because we're gonna get Josh's feedback on everything we're gonna send over to him. We're gonna formalize it into something that's a little bit more concise and a little bit more put together. We're going to include all of this into some kind of incorporated output, and then that's gonna be what we're gonna go into the next step with, which you've identified is going to be the advisory board, because we wanna get their feedback and incorporate it, right?
That's what's in front of me.
Okay. So from advisory board, once we go through, that means we need another committee meeting in between, right? Because we're going to take what the advisory board says, we're going to decide if we want to incorporate it or if we want to tell them to go pound sand, no offense, and then move forward from there. From there, the next step is going to be a community meeting, correct? After that community meeting, we'll need another committee meeting to take in any feedback from the community, make any changes, or back to the pound sand again. And then from there, then we go to the boards and committees. Now, if we're gonna do that as one meeting with everybody in the library to say, hey, look, everybody, this is it. We talked to these people, everybody in town, this is what we're coming with. Please let us know if you have any concerns. We do one more committee meeting after that to finalize, then it goes to warrant. I just listed off 7 meetings? Right?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
7 meetings.
With time to make progress in between the meetings.
Yeah, it's actually spaced out okay here. So, as I was writing, as Kevin was speaking, so if we meet in early, there's 4 Tuesdays in January, so if we meet the first Tuesday of January, that gives us 4 weeks to prepare for what we're calling the advisory board meeting, which would be the first week of February. 2 weeks later, which is the third of 4 Tuesdays in February, would be our committee meeting, with the first Tuesday in March being our public meeting. There's 5 Tuesdays in March. The third Tuesday in March would be our committee meeting. The first Tuesday in April would be the advisory board. We would be delivering our warrant to the advisory board. The third Tuesday in April, we'd have our final committee, well, we wouldn't need another committee meeting after we present the warrant.
Do we have to meet on Tuesdays?
I thought we're doing,
No, it's just a day, yeah, just because.
so, right, so we get, is it gonna be Monday though? Just not to be a, because Tuesday,
Monday's fine, I don't know
Okay.
why I use Tuesday. I use
Alright.
Tuesday because the spring meeting's on Tuesday, and I backed out
Oh, alright.
weeks from that.
because select board meets Tuesday and planning board, that's all,
And Board of Health.
and the Board of Health.
But all the dates he was mentioning was between the Board of Health meetings. That worked out for me just fine.
So Monday, right? So
All the Mondays. Same
Mondays,
week,
same
week,
same
Sunday.
concept, just on Monday. Okay. So you're talking January 6th?
Sure.
All right, so we can put some dates and some names to the meetings again? Sorry.
First week of January.
January 6th
Mm-hmm.
is,
Committee meeting,
Committee
B1,
meeting.
B1 committee.
Yep. We need to show up with having contemplated this evening's discussion with our recommendations on what we were gonna do with the warrant items, and anything we wanna have in discussion for the advisory board, planning board meeting, which is the first week of February.
So January 6th, and then when's the next one you want to meet?
The first week of February.
So that would be the
February
3rd.
3rd.
That's the advisory board, planning board meeting. The next meeting would be the third
I
week.
can't guarantee that the advisory board will meet with you on a Monday. Just,
All right, maybe we gotta go
I'm
Wednesday.
telling
then.
everybody for scheduling purposes, you can say that week.
So what's, the third was Monday, what's that Wednesday?
5th?
I mean, we meet on Wednesdays, but we don't meet in January or February. So
Alright.
it's not, no matter what, it's a different day, it's a different week, it doesn't matter, because it's not our normal, so it doesn't have to be a Wednesday, I'm just saying.
Alright, well, it's our
You have to
target, I
request
guess.
it for some time that week, and what they'll do is they'll send us all an email and say,
Okay.
which of the nights this week can we get a quorum?
Sure.
And then they'll go from there.
But you really did like this room, right?
I do like this room, so it needs to be a Monday or a Wednesday, so we can have this
So it's
room.
either gotta be Monday or Thursday of that week?
All right, great, Monday or Thursday. These chairs are way better. We need to start pulling some strings to the advisory board, we need better chairs.
Right, so the third week of February for our follow-up, the advisory board meeting with the committee is,
That's actually President's Day. Is that an issue with school vacation or anything?
Yeah, I'll probably be out of town.
Probably.
That's February vacation.
Yeah.
so we can kick it to the fourth week.
24th?
24th. And what was that one?
That's the
Follow up.
committee meeting. That's where we decide if we're going to listen to the advisory board or not.
I mean, I wouldn't, they're punching.
That's probably when the warrant too, right, Kevin? Probably, that's usually around the,
When we open the warrant,
yeah.
1, 2,
No,
yeah.
like, open or close?
That's
Yeah,
like-
no, that's
February for the
February, you
May
still have to
meeting?
do the town, you still have to do your
Yeah.
town presentation.
So the first week of March, we were talking about a public meeting.
That would
So the
be March
second?
2nd.
And the third week of March, we were talking about a committee meeting.
16th.
And then we're delivering the warrant to the advisory board the first week of April.
That-
First week in April.
That won't be
so
a
the
meeting though, will it?
First Monday in April is the 6th.
Will that be a meeting for you?
I don't know, would you advise that we come to the advisory board with the warrant?
Well, if you did, it would be a Wednesday, and you would submit your warrants first, and then generally, you either go ahead and say, hey, I know there's gonna be a lot of questions, so you want me the first week, second week, or the third week? Or you can wait for them to call you back and ask you to come in.
So we need to schedule a meeting with the advisory board
Yeah.
sometime in April.
In
It'll
April,
be a
right?
Wednesday.
Yeah.
TBD.
Just because that's what, at that point, our meetings would have started already.
Right,
So you
yep,
would come
yep.
on a Wednesday, because that's when we would have already been meeting. We usually start about 5 weeks before town meetings, 6 weeks sometimes.
Okay.
So
You
then
just
the
have to have
last,
time to get all the schools and all the town people in for their,
Town meeting is what day?
Budgets.
so the last week of April, the warrant is closed, and town meeting is the second Tuesday in May.
Which is the 12th.
Mm-hmm. And then the planning board would hold their public hearing in April.
I didn't put anything in past the March one, simply because, that's just presenting, like you said, that's just I did the March 16th, and I didn't do anything after that. So if you need me for something after that, you just need to let me know. But you're just talking, after that, it was just presenting to advisory, which I would already be a
Yeah.
part of.
And Rich,
But
I
if
mean,
there's something else you want me for after March 16th, just let me know.
even running through the circuit of the boards and committees following the warrant submission 4/6 won't be a big undertaking. You're gonna go in and highlight, this is what we had before, this is what we changed going into Springtown meeting. I mean,
You may not even have to present. If advisory agrees to do the lean-in meeting that we were talking about in February, I don't remember, I wrote it down, but January, February, and then you make the changes that they recommend, then you don't, when spring comes and you put the warrant through, we'll go through the warrant in our meeting, but odds are we won't have any questions, unless you didn't take all of the recommendations, and then they might, again, go, hey, why didn't you do this one, what's your rationale? But otherwise, they wouldn't, because we're already, like I said, spring meeting is busy, we're getting, last year, King Philip came, Freeman came, King Philip Middle School came, because those are two separate superintendents, and police chief, fire chief, financial planner, town
capital
planner.
improvement plan is coming this year.
Yeah, they all have to submit their budgets to us. And that
Well,
takes a
we would only be
long
there to
time,
answer
so.
questions, not
so if-
necessarily make a
Yeah,
presentation.
exactly. So it may just be you just guys select one person to come to that meeting, and you just are there in case there's questions. But I don't think you'll need to come and do like what he did before, like a whole presentation, because
Okay,
hopefully you would have already done that.
But to Kevin's point, I mean, I think we had talked about a while ago that it would be beneficial to go into town meeting saying ZBA's on board, the health board is on board, the conservation commission is on board, the board of selectmen's on board, the advisory board's on board. It would be good to do that if we can.
Yeah, absolutely. So you'll get the planning board's vote during the public hearing, or following the public hearing. As part of the warrant review, you'll get the Board of Selectmen's recommendation. You just have to find the appropriate time to go into the Board of Health and to the ZBA.
I'll tell you when our meetings are, if you need to, want to know.
We got some time to figure this out. And then we'll have to continue the conversations with the planning board too. All right. Easy peasy.
What do you think?
I just said it out loud. Doesn't mean I think it. Motion to adjourn?
Whoa, 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 whoa.
He's like, 3 hours is not enough.
Hold up. Selectmen's meetings go till midnight at least, all right?
So do the planning board meetings.
Yeah, seriously.
Which I have to sit through tomorrow, so.
So just to quickly go back through Rich's agenda, we reviewed the report, at least the aspects of it that we have identified incurred any kind of concern with the community leading up to this point. We did a recap of the efforts from September to town meeting. We did not discuss the future involvement of MAPC. We highlighted that Josh would just magically do things for us, but do we have funding for Josh to magically do things for us? I know that you said that it was up in the air right now, but
Right.
let's talk worst case scenario. What happens if Josh is not available to us?
Kevin presents the report.
Bad idea.
That's,
Bad idea.
I don't have a great answer to that.
Okay, well, we should think about that in the next coming weeks, just to identify who would be our point person for verbiage, language, data set analysis, presentation, whatever it may be. We should come up with Plan Bs for all this stuff, because we have a really tight timeline right now. If he comes out and says, sorry, it didn't go through, or I have to wait to hear back, we got to go to Plan B now.
Is he committed through a certain point?
We passed it already.
He's
Past
passed.
it.
Yeah.
So is he gonna give you access to the file to make changes, or is it a read-only file for this?
Oh, no, we can have access to the files, yeah, so.
Most of the work's done. It'd be great if he presented it, but if not, you can at least make the changes to the summary.
Yeah, a lot of the benefit of him doing it is speaking to his experience and working with other communities and
Yeah.
his professional aspects.
Yeah.
But I don't necessarily think that we'd be way too far behind the 8 ball if one of us had to pick up the slack. I just want to make sure we define that ahead of time. We don't have time to meet again and come up with crazy off-the-cuff plans. All right, so that's future involvement with MAPC. Action items, you're going to follow up with Josh with what we came out with today as terms of, as far as our concerns that we've highlighted and things we want to see changed.
Correct, yep.
He'll either change them or give feedback why we shouldn't change them, which we'll discuss at our next meeting on 1/6, where we'll finalize all these things. Any other action items? Anybody else got a takeaway here that they're going to?
Yeah, we need to, any comments that are going to be made on the report need to be collected, I'm assuming by Rich, and sent to Josh for final edits, like language and there's the map and other things, so.
So
Did we want to follow up with anyone regarding tax and bring someone into one of those meetings?
Yeah, that might be good to have
At the
That's
next
a
one?
follow-up next
our
time.
tax
I don't know
assessor
who
coming
does
for
that.
the 1/6 meeting, if we can coordinate that.
You should reach out to Todd and ask him if the town has someone specific, not him, because he's the financial planner for the town, or the
Director.
CFO for the
Mhm.
town, or whatever. Not him, but he might know who the best tax person is
Do we
that
have
he
a
deals
tax-
with.
Do we have a tax assessor
We have an assessor,
in
yeah.
town?
Sure
Tax
do.
assessor, though, aren't they, they just assess property values, correct?
Yeah, but they also do forecasting, and they identify what the impact or trends look like, and I think this plays a little bit of a part of that.
Okay.
I think during our last tax rate meeting, the tax assessor did a great job of highlighting why they think we're going to get to where we want to go. So I think he'll be able to speak intelligently about this, but he'll be able to
Okay.
say for sure.
Okay, all right. Now, the report itself, I mean, we had, I know, a couple of comments relative to the executive summary. There's some pieces I think need to be edited. What's the thought about releasing it before editing it, or wait to try to get a couple of those things cleaned up?
I think we should get it cleaned up. So what do we say, edits to Rich by Friday?
We are collectively sending our edits to Rich by Friday?
That's what I'm proposing, is that
No, I was just clarifying. that
too
that's what you meant.
onerous?
Yeah, that's fine.
Because we're just recommending verbiage and grammatical things at this point. We're not changing any of the
Content.
recommendation or content, because we're identifying that as being what was previously recommended. This is what we're adjusting.
Yeah,
moving
yeah,
forward.
no, it's
Right.
more the concept.
So I think that,
So you want to release this with the summary before you've made any changes?
we want to release the report that was provided by MAPC related to the work that was done in 2019. Yes.
Okay.
Because I think people want to see there's a lot of information in here that I don't think people have necessarily had access to yet. And
Well, yeah, it should have, yeah, I think that was part of the problem with it trying to send it to vote on a town meeting in the fall before the report was public.
Right.
I just didn't know if you wanted to release it, then meet with, do the presentation, the advisory, make changes, and then release it again. That was all I was saying.
yeah, I don't think we'd be necessarily changing the report at this point. I think we'd be
No, I think
changing
we-
our recommendation.
And the summary, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
So does the
as
report-
discussed, maybe people, sorry.
No, I was gonna say, does the report include the recommendations in the summary? Should we?
That's what I was saying.
I think we're moving on from the report. The report closes our discussions with the MAPC up until, say, today, right? Now we're moving on from the report.
Right, but I can see what Susan is saying in terms of, do we want to make public the report with the controversial stuff in it that we're working to fix and change? Or do we want to leave that part out? Does that make sense? Does the report include all that?
So
stuff?
I guess I see what you're saying, but
Okay.
but the report is the recommendations of the MAPC. It is not the recommendations of this board.
Okay,
So it's the MAPC's report, not our report.
all right.
And I think it's important for people to see their recommendations relative to the information that they collected, so they could get a better idea as to how we got to where we are right now.
So should there be a
But there definitely
statement
should be something, I think I know what you're gonna say.
attached to the
Yeah,
report
there
that
definitely
says-
should be a
yeah.
disclaimer on there that
Yeah.
clearly identifies, this
Yeah.
is from the MAPC based
Right.
on the work done from February 2019 to September 2019. Moving forward, the Town Center Zoning Committee is going to be reassessing and putting forth a new recommendation come this spring.
Yes, thank you.
Look at you. Got all of them in there. Done.
I was listening.
Norfolk Town Center, too. That's
Yeah,
pretty good.
nailed it. You get all that, Rich?
So who's,
Wrote this
are we,
corner.
are we going to draft then that piece, or that disclaimer, that
Oh, I mean-
page? I'm just, we're trying to make sure we have all the next steps, so.
Maybe on
I'm gonna-
video right there.
I'm gonna draft a disclaimer, I'll send it to you
There we go.
to take a look at.
Very good.
And we'll have to then draft our own executive summary. I'll do that.
So a big piece of what is going to make this timeline work is going to be our collective ability to get feedback to Rich offline in between these meetings. So if he sends something out that says, here's the disclaimer, what's everybody think? As fast as everybody can get something back and say, look good, or no, absolutely not, I have a huge problem with that. Getting that feedback back to him as fast as possible is going to help make this all work.
Just to confirm, we're supposed to just reply to you, not reply all?
Just reply to me. Nobody on the committee.
Because we are committed to the open meeting laws of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in this committee.
I
Very good.
replied all saying I was gonna be late tonight.
That's okay.
But I was-
That's okay.
Scheduling is okay. Scheduling is okay.
MBTA is not reliable. We can take that up at a different time.
Tomorrow night if you'd like.
I took the 5:25 train at 5:50 today.
Yeah, that's what, well, my husband, I was waiting for him to get home.
Oh, boy.
It was a
All
rough
right.
day.
Now we might have a,
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'm getting comfortable again.
Kevin
Motion to
really wants
adjourn.
to stay
Do
until
we
midnight.
have to adjourn?
You already made the motion, so I'd be seconding it.
I would like to say that I went to bed at 2 and got up at 3:30 for my flight, so
Oh,
I'm a little
jeez.
tired.
You're ready to go.
Word.
I'm good.
A little tired. I had an hour and a half sleep.
All right, second motion to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
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 And the Bruins are losing.